The land devours the weak and spits out their bones. Eleanor Reed knew this truth, and her marrow had watched it claim her husband Michael, leaving her alone with a dying ranch and a framed military commendation she could never bring herself to look at directly. The people of Redemption were already taking bets on which day she would surrender. Rumors swirled about the transcontinental railroad coming through these parts, transforming worthless wildernesses into gold for whoever held the deeds. But Eleanor had promises to keep. On the night of the worst dust storm in 3 decades, when the wind screamed through the cracks in the walls like tortured souls, Eleanor heard another sound beneath the howl: metal striking metal, leather snapping, and the labored breathing of horses. On her porch lay a man bleeding his life into the boards, and behind him 10 horses bearing saddlebags heavy with a stolen Civil War legacy, a treasure that could save her land or be her death sentence. The wind stole her breath as she dragged the stranger inside. His blood left a trail across her floor, but it was what he carried that would mark them both forever. The dust was a living thing, malevolent, impatient. It found every crack in the weathered cabin walls, every gap in the ill-fitting window frames. It coated Eleanor Reed's skin, her hair, the inside of her lungs, with a fine, persistent grit that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. 2 years since Michael's death, and the land was still trying to scour away any trace of human presence. Eleanor sat at her rough-hewn table, a single oil lamp casting long shadows across the cabin's interior. Before her lay the homestead certificate, the edges worn from frequent handling. 160 acres, 5 years of blood and sweat poured into this unforgiving soil. Michael had been so proud the day they'd built the required 12 by 14-foot cabin, humble as it was. 3 more months, and they would have received the final deed. 3 months too many. Her fingers traced the embossed seal of the United States government. By law, as Michael's widow, she could complete the proving up period. By reality, every force in this territory seemed determined to prevent it. The cattle were dying, the well was running low, and Maxwell Harding would return soon enough with another insulting offer for her land. The framed military commendation hung on the wall opposite her bed, Michael's service with the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, one of the first African-American units in the Union Army, recognized for bravery at Fort Wagner. Eleanor hadn't been able to look at it directly since the funeral. Tonight was no different. The storm announced itself with a low, distant moan that grew steadily into a banshee's wail. Eleanor moved with practiced efficiency, securing shutters, stuffing rags beneath the door covering the meager food supplies. When the first blast hit the cabin, it shuddered like a living thing. "Not tonight," she whispered to the darkness. "You don't get to take anything more tonight." For an hour, the world outside ceased to exist, reduced to a howling void of dust and wind. Eleanor huddled by the small fireplace, the flames dancing erratically with each new gust that found its way down the chimney. The storm's rhythm had become familiar, almost hypnotic, when a new sound cut through the chaos. A heavy thud against her front door. Eleanor froze, straining to hear. Not the wind, something solid, living. Another impact followed by a sound that raised the hair on her arms, a horse's panicked whinny. The rifle was in her hands before she registered, reaching for it. 5 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Michael had taught her to shoot before they had even reached the territory. "Land's no good to you if you can't defend it," he had said. A third impact splintering the wood around the latch. Eleanor positioned herself behind the table rifle, aimed steady at the door. "I'm armed," she called out, voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "State your business or move on." Instead of an answer, she heard a pained groan followed by the distinct sound of a body collapsing on her porch. Then came the nervous shuffling of not one horse, but many, their tack jingling against the storm's roar. Curiosity warred with caution. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, the nearest town 15. No one traveled in a storm like this unless they were desperate or dangerous, often both. Decision made, Eleanor moved to the window, keeping the rifle ready. Carefully, she pushed aside the edge of the oilcloth covering the glass and peered out into the maelstrom. The sight stole her breath. 10 horses stood huddled together in her yard, their coats dark with sweat and dust, their eyes wide with fear. Heavy canvas packs were strapped to their backs, and they were all connected by lead ropes to a man. He lay face down on her porch, one arm outstretched toward her door, the ropes tangled around him in a macabre web. "Damn it all," Eleanor muttered. She unbolted the door, bracing herself against the assault of wind and dust. The man didn't move as she stepped onto the porch. Blood pooled beneath him, black in the dim light. Gunshot wounds, she realized, noting the torn fabric and telltale smell. For a moment, Eleanor considered closing the door, pretending she'd seen nothing. This man's troubles were not hers. She had enough of her own. But something, perhaps Michael's voice in her memory, wouldn't let her. With strength born of years working the land, Eleanor grabbed the man under his arms and dragged him across the threshold, leaving the horses trembling in the yard. He was heavy, solid muscle beneath soaked clothing. His dark hair was matted with blood from a gash along his temple, and his face, what she could see of it beneath the grime, was all hard angles and stubborn lines. After securing the door against the storm, Eleanor returned to the stranger. He was alive, barely. His breathing was shallow, his skin alarmingly cold. Acting on instinct, refined by necessity, she cut away his shirt, revealing a gunshot wound in his left shoulder and a body mapped with old scars. As she cleaned and bandaged the wound, her fingers brushed against something hard beneath his undershirt. A leather cord around his neck held a military badge, Union Army Intelligence Bureau, and a small brass key. "Who are you?" she murmured, though she expected no answer. The stranger remained unconscious as Eleanor worked his features, relaxing slightly as the laudanum she administered took effect. When she had done all she could for him, her thoughts turned to the horses still outside, exposed to the fury of the storm. Wrapping her shawl tightly around her head and face, she ventured back into the howling darkness. The horses, exhausted and frightened, offered little resistance as she led them one by one to her small barn. As she untied the heavy packs to relieve their burden, one of the canvas bags split open, spilling its contents onto the straw-covered floor. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Gold. Raw, unrefined nuggets and dust gleaming dully in the lantern light. With trembling hands, she opened another pack and another. All the same. More gold than she had ever seen, more than she had imagined existed in the whole territory. A chill that had nothing to do with the wind seeped into her bones. This was not the modest find of a lucky prospector. This was a fortune. The kind men killed for. The kind men had apparently already tried to kill for. Eleanor secured the barn, hiding the gold as best she could beneath hay and old sacks. Her mind raced with possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. By harboring this man and his gold, she had made herself complicit in whatever violence had occurred. Yet turning him out would mean certain death, if not from his wounds, then from the men who had inflicted them. When she returned to the cabin, the stranger was awake, propped up on one elbow, his eyes clear and gray as winter ice fixed on the door. In his right hand he held a knife she hadn't found when searching him. "The horses," he said, his voice a rough whisper. "Safe in my barn," Eleanor replied, keeping her distance, "along with what they're carrying." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the storm's continued assault on the cabin. "You should have left me out there," he finally said. "Probably," Eleanor agreed, "but I didn't." The man studied her, his gaze assessing everything from the rifle she'd placed within reach to the calluses on her hands. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eleanor Reed. This is my ranch." "Gabriel Winters." He winced as he shifted position. "I'm obliged for the help, Mrs. Reed, but you need to know there are men coming, dangerous men." "Because of the gold," she stated flatly. A shadow passed over his face. "Yes, and they won't care who gets in their way." 3 days passed before the storm finally released its grip on the land. 3 days of uneasy coexistence within the cabin's confines. Gabriel's fever had spiked the first night, leaving him delirious, muttering names in places Eleanor didn't recognize. One name recurred: Marcus. By the third day, Gabriel was strong enough to sit at her table, though the effort clearly cost him. They had established a cautious routine, exchanging only the words necessary for survival. He ate the food she provided, accepted her medical attention with a stoic gratitude, and volunteered nothing about himself or the gold. Eleanor didn't press. The less she knew, the less danger she was in, or so she told herself, but curiosity burned beneath her practical exterior. "Harding will be by today," she said as she placed a bowl of thin porridge before him. "He's a land agent, comes every week to check if I'm ready to sell." Gabriel's eyes narrowed. "Does he usually come alone?" "Yes, he's not the type to dirty his hands, just circling like a vulture waiting for me to fail." Gabriel nodded in understanding the implication. a witness, a complication. If he asks, I'm your cousin, he said, here to help with the ranch. Eleanor almost laughed at the absurdity of it. No one will believe that. They'll believe it more than the truth. She couldn't argue with that logic. Maxwell Harding arrived shortly after noon, his buggy raising a plume of dust visible long before he reached the ranch. Eleanor met him on the porch, her face composed into a neutral mask that betrayed none of the turmoil of the past days. Harding was a man who took up more space than his physical form warranted. His suit was too fine for the territory, his manner too polished. Everything about him spoke of misplaced civilization of Eastern money and ambition transplanted to soil that rejected such things. Mrs. Reed, he called out with manufactured concern as he approached. That was quite a storm. I was worried about you out here all alone. As you can see, Mr. Harding, I'm still standing, and not alone anymore. She gestured toward the barn where Gabriel was visible, seemingly occupied with repairing a broken latch. The bandage on his shoulder was hidden beneath a borrowed shirt. Harding's smile faltered momentarily. A hired hand times must be improving. Family, Eleanor corrected. My cousin, here to help with the proving up. Harding's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. How fortunate. Though I must remind you, Mrs. Reed, that the Homestead Act has specific requirements about improvements to the land. A woman alone might find those challenging to meet within the required time frame. I'm aware of the law, Mr. Harding, Eleanor replied coolly. All 160 acres, 5 years residence, a dwelling no less than 12 by 14 feet, cultivation and improvement of the land. We've met every requirement. Something like surprise flickered across Harding's face before he masked it with another smile. Of course, still my offer stands. A fair price given the circumstances. No need to struggle through another season. The ranch is not for sale. Harding's composure slipped, revealing a flash of the calculating man beneath the veneer. You should reconsider, Mrs. Reed. There are rumors about the railroad survey. Properties in this region could change hands quickly in the coming months. Eleanor's heart quickened at the mention of the railroad, but she kept her expression neutral. All the more reason to hold on to what's mine. What's yours? Harding chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. My dear, nothing is truly yours until that final deed is in your hand. And so many things can happen in these last few months of proving up. Accidents, misunderstandings about property lines, paperwork, lost in transit. The threat was thinly veiled, but Eleanor stood her ground. Good day, Mr. Harding. As the land agent's buggy disappeared over the ridge, Gabriel approached from the barn, his face grim. He knows something. About you. About the land. Gabriel's eyes scanned the horizon. The railroad survey isn't just a rumor. They're finalizing the route. Eleanor frowned. How would you know that? Because it's why my partner was killed. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the yard, Gabriel finally told his story, or parts of it. He had been a scout for the Union Army Intelligence Bureau during the war, skilled at moving through enemy territory undetected. After the war, he'd become a bounty hunter of sorts, tracking men who had evaded justice. His partner, Marcus Sullivan, had been a railway engineer working on the Transcontinental Project. Marcus had discovered irregularities in the survey maps, evidence that someone with inside knowledge was buying up land along the proposed route, manipulating the survey to increase their holdings value. Marcus started asking questions. Gabriel said, his voice tight. A week later, he was dead, shot in the back outside a saloon in Redemption. And the gold? Eleanor asked. Gabriel hesitated, weighing how much to tell her. That's where things get complicated. Before he could continue, Eleanor noticed movement on the ridge to the east, a rider silhouetted against the setting sun watching the ranch. When she pointed it out, Gabriel's expression darkened. Get inside, he ordered, all trace of the wounded man gone. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. He was already moving toward the barn, his right hand reaching for something tucked in his belt, a revolver she hadn't realized he possessed. Eleanor wanted to protest, to demand more answers, but the urgency in his voice brooked no argument. From the cabin window, she watched as Gabriel mounted one of his horses, the strongest of the 10, and rode out toward the ridge. The watcher turned and disappeared over the horizon, Gabriel in pursuit. Hours passed, night fell thick and moonless. Eleanor kept the lamps unlit, moving through the darkness by memory, the rifle a constant companion. Every sound and the settling of the cabin, the distant call of a coyote, sent her heart racing. Near midnight, hoofbeats approached from the east. Eleanor positioned herself by the window, rifle ready. Relief flooded her when she recognized Gabriel's silhouette. She unbolted the door to admit him, noticing immediately the fresh blood on his sleeve and the grim set of his mouth. "One of Blackwood's men," he said without preamble. "Scouting ahead. Did you, he'll report back that the ranch is occupied by a woman and a hired hand. Nothing more." Gabriel's tone made it clear the man had lived, though not without persuasion. "Who is Blackwood?" Gabriel sank into a chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Charles Blackwood, former colonel in the Union Army, now a principal investor in the Central Pacific Railroad, and the man who killed Marcus." Eleanor filled a tin cup with water and passed it to him. "Why would a railroad investor kill an engineer?" "Because Marcus discovered that Blackwood was using military intelligence to identify the railroad's route before it was public knowledge. He's been buying land along the path for Penny's land that will be worth fortunes once the railroad comes through." Gabriel's knuckles whitened around the cup. "And he's not doing it legally." "The homestead certificates," Eleanor breathed, understanding dawning. "He's forging them, invalidating them." Gabriel looked at her sharply. "How would you know about that?" Eleanor hesitated, then moved to a trunk in the corner. From beneath carefully folded linens, she withdrew a leather portfolio. "Before I married Michael, I worked as a clerk for Judge Hamilton in St. Louis. He specialized in land dispute cases." She opened the portfolio, revealing neatly arranged legal documents. "I helped many freedmen and veterans complete their homestead applications. I know exactly what valid certificates look like." Gabriel stared at her with new appreciation. "You're not just a rancher's widow." "No more than you're just a bounty hunter," she countered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." Eleanor spread the documents on the table. "Harding's threats make more sense now. He's working for Blackwood, trying to force me off my land because your ranch sits at a critical junction for the proposed route," Gabriel finished. "Ideal location for a water stop or depot." The pieces were falling into place, but one crucial element remained unexplained. "And the gold? How does that fit into all this?" Gabriel's expression closed again. "That's not something you need to concern yourself with." Eleanor straightened, indignation flaring. "I have 10 horses full of gold in my barn, a wounded man at my table, and killers watching my ranch. I think I'm already concerned." Their standoff was interrupted by the sound of paper crinkling. Gabriel reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded document, yellowed with age and stained with what looked suspiciously like dried blood. He placed it on the table between them. "I found this among Marcus's things after he was killed. It's what started all this." Eleanor carefully unfolded the paper. It was a military dispatch marked confidential, bearing the signature of a Union general she recognized from her time with the judge. The contents made her blood run cold. It detailed the disappearance of a gold shipment valued at $100,000 from a Union Army depot in the final days of the Civil War. The gold, designated as war funds, was presumed stolen by a group of deserters. The dispatch ordered all military personnel to be on alert for any sign of the missing shipment. "This is a fortune," Eleanor whispered. "But why would Marcus have this document, and how did you end up with the gold?" "Marcus didn't have just this document," Gabriel replied, his voice low. "He had evidence suggesting the gold never disappeared at all, said it was diverted by order of someone high in the Union command." "For what purpose?" Gabriel's eyes met hers, weighing her trustworthiness one final time. "That's what I was trying to find out when Blackwood's men caught up with me 3 days ago. Whatever the truth is, it got Marcus killed, and now they're coming for the gold, and anyone who knows about it." The night deepened around them, the cabin suddenly feeling very small and exposed on the vast empty plain. Eleanor studied the document again, her mind working through the implications. "There's something you're not telling me," she said finally. Gabriel nodded, the admission costing him visibly. "There is, but right now the less you know, the safer you'll be." Eleanor laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I think we're well past safe, Mr. Winters." Outside, a nightbird called, then fell silent. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain, the first in months. Eleanor felt the weight of choices, narrowing of paths, converging toward an inevitable confrontation. "How many men does Blackwood have?" At least 5 that I've seen. Probably more. And when will they come? Soon, within days. Gabriel's gaze was steady. You should leave, Mrs. Reed. This isn't your fight. Eleanor looked around the cabin, at the table Michael had built with his own hands, at the quilt her mother had made for their wedding, at the certificate that represented years of backbreaking labor and stubborn hope. This is my home, she said simply, and apparently it's worth fighting for in more ways than I realized. She crossed to the fireplace and removed a loose brick from the chimney. From the hidden space, she extracted a small oilskin package. Unwrapping it revealed a Colt Navy revolver, well-maintained despite its age. Michael's, she explained, checking the chambers with practiced ease. He taught me to use it before he taught me to plow. Gabriel watched her reassessment evident in his eyes. You're full of surprises, Mrs. Reed. Eleanor, she corrected. If we're going to fight together, you might as well use my name. The following morning brought no respite from tension, but it did bring clarity of purpose. While Gabriel's wound still limited his movement, his mind was sharp, strategic. Together they assessed the ranch's defensibility, identifying weaknesses and advantages. The barn was vulnerable, too far from the cabin for effective coverage. The well sat exposed in the yard. The ridge to the east offered a perfect vantage point for anyone watching the property. We need to prepare as if they'll come at night, Gabriel said as they walked the perimeter. Blackwood prefers to avoid witnesses. Eleanor nodded, mentally cataloging supplies and ammunition. How long can your horses go without water? A day, maybe 2. Why? I'm thinking we move them to the hidden spring in the north pasture. Keep them out of sight along with most of the gold. Gabriel considered this, then agreed. Good thinking. We'll keep 1 pack here. Make it look like that's all there is if they search the place. As they worked through the day, a strange companionship developed between them. Gabriel helped repair the broken latch on the barn door, his movements betraying a craftsman's precision despite his injury. Eleanor showed him the defensive improvements Michael had made to the cabin. The reinforced shutters, the narrow gun ports disguised as decorative carvings. By midday, they had moved the horses and most of the gold to the secluded spring. As they were returning to the ranch, Gabriel suddenly stiffened, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. What is it? Eleanor asked, following his gaze. There, he pointed to what appeared to be an ordinary rock formation on the hillside. That wasn't there yesterday. Eleanor squinted against the sun. I don't see anything unusual. Exactly, it's too perfect. Gabriel's voice dropped. Someone's watching us. Has been since we left the spring. They continued toward the cabin, their conversations shifting to mundane topics for the benefit of unseen observers. Once inside, Gabriel moved to the window, carefully scanning the terrain. We need to know exactly what we're up against, he said. I'm going to draw them out, make them show their hand. Eleanor frowned. How? I'll ride into redemption tomorrow. Let myself be seen. They'll think I'm either running or looking for help. That's suicide. Gabriel shook his head. It's reconnaissance, and it might buy us time to prepare. Eleanor wanted to argue, but recognized the logic in his plan. And what do I do while you're playing target? Gabriel moved to the table where they'd spread out their limited arsenal. You practice. If it comes to a fight, I need to know you can hit what you aim at. For the next hour, Gabriel drilled Eleanor on loading, firing, and reloading the rifle and revolver. Her skill impressed him. Michael had been a thorough teacher, but Gabriel pushed her further, insisting she practice until the movements became automatic. Don't think, he instructed as she sighted along the rifle barrel at a target he'd set up in the yard. Just breathe, see the target, and squeeze. The rifle cracked, and the can at 80 yards jumped into the air. Eleanor allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Again, Gabriel said, unmoved by her success, until you can do it with your eyes half closed and your hands numb with cold. As dusk approached, they retreated to the cabin in the relative security of its walls. Gabriel settled in a chair by the window, his revolver within easy reach. Eleanor busied herself preparing a simple meal, the familiar routine a welcome distraction from the looming threat. Tell me about Michael, Gabriel said unexpectedly. Eleanor's hands stilled over the pot she was stirring. Why? Because knowing what you're fighting for makes you fight smarter. She considered this, then nodded. He was a cartographer in the war, mapped terrain for Union advances. That's how we ended up here. He'd seen the land during his service, knew its potential. The 54th Massachusetts, Gabriel noted, glancing at the framed commendation. That was a colored regiment. Yes, Michael was their map maker, but he fought alongside them at Fort Wagner. Pride colored her voice. He believed in what they were fighting for. Equality, justice. Did he ever mention a special fund? Gabriel asked, his tone carefully neutral. Something set up by the Lincoln administration. Eleanor frowned. Not that I recall. Why pass? Gabriel seemed about to answer when a floorboard creaked. Not from their movement, but from beneath the cabin. Both froze, listening intently. The root cellar, Eleanor whispered. Gabriel was on his feet instantly, revolver drawn. He moved silently to the trap door in the floor, positioned himself, then yanked it open in one swift motion. A startled yelp echoed from below, followed by the sound of scrabbling movement. Gabriel reached down and hauled up a thin, dirty figure, a boy no more than 12 years old. Please don't shoot me, mister, the boy gasped, eyes wide with terror. Eleanor recognized him immediately. Tommy? Tommy Freeman. What on earth are you doing under my floor? The boy's eyes darted between them. Ma sent me. Said to warn you. Men been asking about the ranch in town. Mean-looking men with guns. Gabriel lowered his weapon but maintained his grip on the boy's collar. What men? How many? 4 that I seen, led by a big fella with a scar down his face. Called himself Colonel something. Gabriel and Eleanor exchanged glances. Blackwood, they said in unison. They've been asking if anyone new's come through, Tommy continued, slightly calmer now that he wasn't staring down a gun barrel. Offering money for information. And what did people tell them? Eleanor asked. Tommy shrugged. Not much. Folks in Redemption don't much care for outsiders asking questions, especially not the kind that wear city clothes but carry guns like they know how to use them. Gabriel finally released the boy. How'd you get here without being seen? A flash of pride crossed Tommy's face. Creek bed's dry enough to walk through. Comes up behind your north pasture. Ma says my pa used it during the war when the slave catchers came through. Eleanor nodded, understanding. Sarah Freeman, Tommy's mother, was a freed slave who'd established a small but thriving farm at the edge of the territory. She and Eleanor had formed a quiet alliance in a region where both women were viewed as anomalies. Your mother's a wise woman, Eleanor said. Thank her for the warning. She said to tell you something else. Tommy added, his brow furrowing with concentration. Said to tell you, Caleb's station is ready if needed. She said you'd understand. Eleanor didn't understand, but she saw a recognition flash in Gabriel's eyes. Thank you, Tommy, she said, retrieving a small bundle of cornbread from the cupboard and pressing it into the boy's hands. Get home safe now. Use that creek bed both ways. After the boy had gone, Eleanor turned to Gabriel. What's Caleb's station? Gabriel was already checking his weapons, a new urgency in his movements. Not what? Who? Caleb was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. If Sarah's using that name, she's offering a safe house, a place to hide if things go wrong. How would you know that? And how would Sarah? Gabriel met her gaze directly. Because the gold in those saddlebags isn't what Blackwood thinks it is. It was never meant for the war effort. He moved to the fireplace and carefully lifted the framed commendation from the wall. Turning it over, he worked at the backing until it came loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a folded map. I suspected Michael might have been involved when I saw this regiment's citation, Gabriel explained. The 54th wasn't just any unit. Many of its officers were abolitionists with connections to the railroad. Eleanor stared at the map he unfolded on the table. It showed the territory in detail she'd never seen, with markings and symbols she didn't recognize. What is this, a freedom map? Gabriel said softly. Routes and safe houses for escaped slaves, but this one was made after the war ended, after the Emancipation Proclamation. I don't understand. Why would they need escape routes after emancipation? Because freedom on paper isn't the same as freedom in reality, especially when it comes to land. Gabriel traced a route on the map with his finger. This was for freedmen trying to claim land under the Homestead Act, land they were legally entitled to, but often prevented from claiming by violence or legal manipulation. Eleanor's mind was racing, connecting disparate pieces of information. And the gold? Gabriel took a deep breath. It was a secret fund established by Lincoln in the final months of the war. Money set aside to help former slaves establish homesteads. and to provide the capital they needed for tools, seed, livestock. Everything necessary to turn raw land into a productive farm. How do you know this? Because Marcus told me, before he died. Gabriel's voice tightened with emotion. He was part of a network of agents ensuring the fund reached its intended recipients. When he discovered Blackwood was using railroad surveys to identify and seize land meant for freedmen homesteaders, he started investigating and found proof Blackwood was forging homestead certificates, Eleanor finished, just like Harding threatened to do with mine. Gabriel nodded. Blackwood and his associates have been systematically dispossessing legitimate homesteaders, especially widows and freedmen, along the proposed railroad route. The land goes to shell companies that later sell to the railroad at enormous profit. But what does this have to do with the gold? Why would Blackwood care about a fund for freedmen? Because he stole it, Gabriel said flatly. After Lincoln's assassination, Blackwood was one of the officers assigned to oversee the transition of certain sensitive financial matters. He diverted the fund, reported it stolen by deserters, and has been using it to finance his land-grabbing operation. Eleanor sat heavily in a chair, the magnitude of the conspiracy overwhelming. And Michael, did he know about this? A shadow crossed Gabriel's face. I believe he did. The map in his commendation frame suggests he was part of the same network as Marcus. Which means his death wasn't an accident. Eleanor whispered, the truth she'd suspected finally spoken aloud. Gabriel couldn't meet her eyes. I think Blackwood killed him to prevent him from exposing the scheme, just like he killed Marcus. A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her, the kind that comes after long-held suspicions are finally confirmed. Tomorrow, she said at last, we don't just prepare for a fight. We prepare to expose the truth. Gabriel looked at her with newfound respect. It won't be easy. Blackwood has connections, influence. So do I, Eleanor replied, thinking of Sarah Freeman and the network she represented. More than anyone realizes. As night deepened around the small cabin, they bent over the map together, plotting not just their defense, but their counterattack. The gold, Lincoln's gold, had found its way back to its intended purpose. And Eleanor Reed, once simply fighting to keep a promise to her husband, now found herself at the center of a battle for justice that extended far beyond her 160 acres. The land devours the weak, she thought, running her fingers over the map's weathered surface. But it also reveals the strong. Dawn broke over the plains with a cold, unforgiving clarity. The storm had scoured the land clean, leaving behind a deceptive tranquility that belied the danger converging on the small ranch. Eleanor stood on her porch watching the sun's first rays catch the weathered wood of the barn. This day would change everything. She could feel it in her bones. Gabriel emerged from the cabin, his movements more fluid now, as his wound continued to heal. The morning light cast his features in sharp relief, highlighting the determination etched into every line of his face. He carried himself like a man accustomed to violence, to making hard choices in harder moments. You still set on riding into redemption? Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. It's our best chance to draw them out, see what we're facing. Eleanor nodded, her gaze sweeping the horizon. And if they decide to skip the formalities and just shoot you in the street? A ghost of a smile touched Gabriel's lips. Then you'll know exactly how many men you're dealing with. It wasn't a joke, and neither of them laughed. There was a brutal pragmatism to their situation that made gallows humor feel redundant. I've been thinking about that map, Eleanor said, turning back toward the cabin. About Michael's involvement with the Freedmen's Network. Gabriel followed, his boots heavy on the wooden boards. What about it? He never told me directly, but there were signs. Visitors in the night, letters he'd burn after reading, and once a family of freedmen stayed in our barn for 3 days before moving on. Eleanor's voice softened with memory. He said they were heading north for work, but now I wonder if they were homesteaders being moved to safety after someone tried to drive them off their land. Gabriel finished. Eleanor nodded, which means Michael wasn't just passively involved. He was actively helping. And that made him a target, Gabriel said grimly. Inside the cabin, Eleanor retrieved a small wooden box from beneath the floorboards under her bed. It contained the few personal items she had of Michael's, his pocket watch, a daguerreotype of them on their wedding day, and a small leather-bound journal. I've never been able to make sense of this, she said, opening the journal to reveal pages filled with seemingly random numbers and letters. I thought it might be accounts, but Gabriel took the journal, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. It's a cipher. Army intelligence used similar methods during the war. Can you read it? Gabriel studied the pages, brow furrowed in concentration. Not without the key. It's a substitution cipher, but complex. Each page likely has a different key. Eleanor thought for a moment, then reached for the map they'd found hidden in the commendation frame. Would this help? There are numbers along the borders. Gabriel's eyes widened as he compared the map coordinates to the first entry in the journal. Yes, this could work. He looked up at Eleanor with newfound respect. Your husband was thorough. Methodical to a fault, she agreed, a sad smile touching her lips. It used to drive me mad how he'd triple-check everything. They worked together for an hour, Gabriel applying the cipher while Eleanor prepared supplies for the day ahead. By the time the sun had fully cleared the horizon, Gabriel had decoded the first few entries. These are records, he said, voice tight with suppressed excitement. Names, dates, locations. Freedmen who received assistance from the Lincoln Fund. His finger traced a line of text. And here, amounts dispensed. It's all documented. Proof the fund existed, Eleanor breathed. Proof of what it was really for. And proof Blackwood stole it, Gabriel added. This journal is evidence of his crimes. Eleanor saw the implications immediately, which makes it as valuable as the gold itself, maybe more so. They carefully concealed the journal and map in a hidden compartment Gabriel constructed beneath the hearthstone. If Blackwood's men searched the cabin, they'd have to tear it apart stone by stone to find it. With preparations complete, Gabriel readied himself for the ride into redemption. He checked his revolver one final time before securing it in his holster. If I'm not back by sundown, assume the worst, he said matter-of-factly. Eleanor handed him a small packet of food, and if the worst happens, take the journal and as much of the gold as you can carry to Sarah Freeman. She'll know what to do with it. Gabriel met her gaze directly. Don't try to hold the ranch against them. Your life is worth more than this land. Eleanor wanted to argue but recognized the truth in his words. This was no longer just about her homestead. It was about justice for Michael, for Marcus, for countless freedmen cheated out of their rightful land. Sundown, she agreed, not a minute later. Gabriel mounted one of the horses they'd kept at the ranch, a sturdy roan gelding that wouldn't attract undue attention. With a final nod to Eleanor, he set off toward redemption, a solitary figure against the vast expanse of prairie. Eleanor watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned her attention to fortifying the cabin. She moved extra ammunition to strategic positions throughout the small space, filled every available container with water, and prepared medical supplies that she desperately hoped wouldn't be needed. As she worked, her mind kept returning to Michael's journal. What other secrets might it contain? How deeply had her husband been involved in this network? And most troubling, had he known the danger he was in? The days stretched endlessly, each hour marked by the sun's slow crawl across the sky. Eleanor found herself checking the rifle's action repeatedly, a nervous habit that betrayed her growing anxiety. By mid-afternoon, she had cleaned every weapon twice and rearranged the cabin's meager furniture to provide additional cover if shooting started. Finally, unable to bear the waiting any longer, she decided to check on the horses and gold hidden at the spring. The short ride would clear her head and give her a better vantage point to watch for Gabriel's return, or for less welcome visitors. The spring lay in a natural depression about a mile north of the ranch, sheltered by a stand of cottonwoods and hidden from casual observation by a ridge of low hills. Eleanor approached cautiously, alert for any sign that the hiding place had been discovered. The horses nickered softly at her approach, seemingly content with their temporary pasture. The canvas packs containing the gold remained undisturbed where they'd hidden them beneath a fallen log. Eleanor dismounted, allowing her own horse to drink from the spring. The peaceful setting stood in stark contrast to the tension coiled within her. She found herself speaking softly to Michael, as she often did when alone. "I wish you'd told me," she murmured. "I could have helped. I could have been prepared." Only the whisper of wind through cottonwood leaves answered her. A sudden movement caught her eye, a flash of something on the ridge above the spring. Eleanor froze, hand moving instinctively to the revolver at her hip. She scanned the ridgeline slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. There it was again, the glint of sunlight on metal, a rifle barrel perhaps, or field glasses. Eleanor calculated her options rapidly. The depression offered cover, but also trapped her if someone decided to come down from the ridge. Her horse was exposed, but if she moved quickly, the decision was made for her when a voice called out from above. "Best not try for that gun, ma'am. I'm a fair shot even at this distance." The voice was female, a fact so unexpected it momentarily disarmed Eleanor's suspicion. "Show yourself," she called back, hand still hovering near her weapon. A figure rose from behind a boulder on the ridge. A black woman in practical riding clothes, a Springfield rifle held competently in her hands. Even at this distance, Eleanor recognized her. "Sarah Freeman." The woman inclined her head slightly. "Mrs. Reed, mind if I come down? This conversation might attract unwanted attention." Eleanor nodded cautiously. Sarah Freeman made her way down the slope with practiced ease, the rifle never wavering from its aim. When she reached the bottom, she kept a prudent distance. "Tommy made it home safe," Sarah said by way of greeting. "Said you had company, a man with government connections and saddlebags full of trouble." "Gabriel Winters," Eleanor confirmed. "He knew your code, Caleb's station." Something in Sarah's posture eased slightly, though the rifle remained steady. "And where is Mr. Winters now?" "Redemption, trying to draw out Blackwood's men." Sarah's expression darkened. "Then he's either very brave or very foolish. Colonel Blackwood arrived in town this morning with 3 men. None of them looked like they were there for the scenery." Eleanor felt her heart constrict. Gabriel knew the risk. "Did he tell you what's in those saddlebags?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the hidden canvas packs. "Lincoln's gold," Eleanor replied, watching Sarah carefully. "Meant for freedmen, homesteaders." Sarah's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the only indication of her surprise. "So he told you the truth. That's more than most white folks get." "Not the whole truth, I suspect," Eleanor said, "but enough to understand what's at stake." A long moment of assessment passed between the two women, each taking the measure of the other. Finally, Sarah lowered her rifle slightly. "Your husband was a good man, Mrs. Reed. He helped many of my people secure their land rights. His death wasn't the accident folks made it out to be." "I know," Eleanor said quietly. "Blackwood killed him because he was part of the network, because he knew about the gold." Sarah nodded grimly. "Blackwood and his railroad friends have been squeezing out legitimate homesteaders all along the proposed route, especially freedmen. And those who resist tend to have unfortunate accidents." "Like Michael," Eleanor said, "and Marcus Sullivan." "Sullivan was careless," Sarah replied, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "Started asking questions too publicly. But he gave us the key to bringing Blackwood down, if we can keep it safe." "The journal," Eleanor guessed. "Michael kept records. More than records. Names, dates, locations of every freedman who received assistance from the Lincoln Fund. Proof the money was authorized at the highest levels of government." Sarah's gaze intensified. "Proof that would ruin Blackwood and his cronies if it ever became public." Eleanor felt the weight of this knowledge settle over her. Michael hadn't just been keeping records. He'd been building a case. "Gabriel has gone to Redemption to draw Blackwood out," Eleanor said. "But if what you're saying is true, we need more than just the journal. We need witnesses, officials who can't be bought." Sarah's expression remained impassive. "There's a circuit judge due in Redemption tomorrow. Judge Harmon. He worked with the Freedmen's Bureau after the war. He can be trusted." Hope flared briefly in Eleanor's chest, only to be dampened by practical concern. "But will Gabriel survive until tomorrow? Blackwood won't hesitate to kill him?" "That depends on how valuable Blackwood thinks he is," Sarah replied. "If he believes Gabriel knows where all the gold is hidden, he might keep him alive for questioning. And if he doesn't," Sarah didn't answer, which was answer enough. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and crimson. Eleanor knew she had to make a decision. "I need to get back to the ranch," she said. "If Gabriel returns, he'll head there first." "And if Blackwood's men get there before him?" Sarah asked pointedly. Eleanor patted the revolver at her hip. "Then they'll find I'm not as helpless as they might expect." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "I'll send word through our network. Get people ready to testify about land seizures and forged documents. If you can hold Blackwood off until Judge Harmon arrives, we might have a chance at justice. And if I can't, then make sure the journal and the gold reach me, Sarah said simply. Too many have died already for this cause. Don't add yourself to that number unnecessarily. With a final exchange of information showing meeting point signals to identify friends from foes, the women parted. Eleanor rode back toward the ranch, her mind racing with plans and contingencies. The sun hung low on the horizon when she crested the final ridge overlooking her property. She reined in sharply at what she saw. Two unfamiliar horses were tethered outside her cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, more than would be expected from the banked fire she'd left. Someone had made themselves at home in her absence. Eleanor dismounted and led her horse into a stand of scrub oak, tethering it where it wouldn't be easily spotted. Drawing her revolver, she approached the cabin on foot, using every bit of cover the terrain offered. As she neared, voices drifted through the open window. Male voices she didn't recognize. Eleanor crept closer, positioning herself beneath the window where she could listen without being seen. Should have been back by now, one voice was saying. You think the woman spotted him in town? Doubtful, replied a second, deeper voice. Reed's widow ain't exactly known for her trips to redemption. Keeps to herself mostly. Still, something ain't right. Harding said she was supposed to be alone, but that fella's been helping around the place. And now neither of 'em is here. Eleanor's heart raced. They were Blackwood's men, no doubt. But where was Gabriel? Had he been captured, killed colonels, getting impatient? The second voice continued. Wants this wrapped up before that circuit judge arrives tomorrow. Why's he so worried about some judge? A bark of laughter. Because Harmon can't be bought. Man's got a reputation for actually caring about the law. Imagine that. Eleanor had heard enough. Gabriel was still missing, and at least two of Blackwood's men were in her cabin. She needed to act, but rushing in would be suicide. As she weighed her options, a flicker of movement across the yard caught her eye. A third man emerged from the barn, walking purposefully toward the cabin. In the fading light, Eleanor could make out a lean, predatory figure with a distinctive scar running down one side of his face. Blackwood himself had come to her ranch. Eleanor shrank back into the shadows as Blackwood entered the cabin. Through the window, she heard the conversation continue. Any sign of Winters? Blackwood's voice was cultured, authoritative, the voice of a man accustomed to command. Nothing, Colonel. Town was quiet. Bartender at the saloon remembered seeing him, said he asked some questions about land claims, then left. And the gold? We've searched the barn and outbuildings, nothing. A pause followed by the sound of something heavy striking wood, a fist against a table perhaps. He has to have hidden it nearby, Blackwood said, his controlled tone belying the violence of his action. The horses were too exhausted to have gone far. What about the Freeman woman's place? One of the men suggested. Harding says she and the widow are friendly. Possible, Blackwood conceded, but Winters wouldn't risk involving more people than necessary. No, it's here somewhere, or at least the widow knows where it is. Eleanor's blood ran cold at his next words. When she returns, we'll encourage her to be forthcoming. Everyone has a breaking point, even stubborn widows. The casual cruelty in his tone left no doubt as to his methods. Eleanor knew she couldn't return to the cabin, but she couldn't abandon it either. Somewhere inside was Michael's journal, evidence that could bring Blackwood to justice. As darkness settled over the land, Eleanor retreated further from the cabin to consider her options. She had one revolver with 6 rounds, limited knowledge of how many men Blackwood had brought, and no idea where Gabriel was. The odds were not in her favor. A soft whinny from the direction of the road drew her attention. Eleanor crouched lower, straining to see through the gathering darkness. A rider was approaching slowly, silhouetted against the last glow of twilight. Gabriel. He was slumped in the saddle, his posture suggesting exhaustion or injury. Eleanor wanted to call out a warning, but any sound would alert Blackwood's men to her presence and to Gabriel's approach. Instead, she began moving parallel to his path, staying low and using the terrain for cover. If she could intercept him before he reached the cabin clearing, she was too late. Gabriel rode directly into the yard, apparently unaware of the danger waiting inside. As he dismounted stiffly in front of the cabin, the door swung open, spilling lamplight across the yard. Mr. Winters, Blackwood's voice carried clearly in the still night air. We've been expecting you. Gabriel froze his hand halfway to his holster. From her position, Eleanor could see at least two armed men flanking Blackwood in the doorway. "Colonel Blackwood," Gabriel replied, his voice betraying no surprise. "Still doing your own dirty work, I'm flattered." "The gold Winters. Where is it?" Gabriel shrugged, a deliberate display of nonchalance. "What gold would that be, Colonel? The Union war chest you reported stolen, or Lincoln's freedmen fund that you actually stole?" A tense silence followed this direct accusation. Eleanor could almost feel Blackwood's rage from her hiding place. "I see Marcus shared his delusions with you before his unfortunate accident," Blackwood finally said. "I had hoped you might be more reasonable. Reasonable enough to tell you where I've hidden the evidence or just the gold." Gabriel's tone remained conversational, but Eleanor could see his body tensing, preparing. "Both would be preferable," Blackwood replied. "Though I admit the gold is my primary concern. The rest is merely hearsay." "Not according to Michael Reed's journal," Gabriel countered. "Pretty detailed records for hearsay." This was a gamble, Eleanor realized. Gabriel was revealing their knowledge of the journal, wedding that Blackwood wouldn't kill him until he revealed its location. "Inside," Blackwood ordered, stepping back from the doorway. "I think it's time we had a proper conversation about your future, Mr. Winters, or lack thereof." Gabriel hesitated, then walked slowly toward the cabin, hands deliberately away from his weapon. As he passed through the doorway, Blackwood's men closed in behind him. The door shut, leaving Eleanor alone in the darkness, with the knowledge that both Gabriel and the evidence that could save him were now in Blackwood's hands. She needed a plan. Fast. Eleanor circled the cabin, cataloging entrances, exits, and potential distractions. The root cellar had an external access point behind the cabin, the same one Tommy Freeman had used to deliver his warning. It might offer a way in, but she would be trapped if discovered. As she deliberated, sounds of a struggle emanated from inside, dull thuds, a crash, and a grunt of pain that she recognized as Gabriel's voice. They were beating him, trying to extract information. Time was running out. Eleanor made her decision. She couldn't take on all of Blackwood's men directly, but she might be able to create enough confusion to give Gabriel a chance. She needed a diversion. Moving quickly to the barn, she gathered lantern, oil rags, and matches. If Blackwood wanted her land so badly, she'd show him what it looked like when it burned. Within minutes, she had prepared several small incendiary bundles. Taking careful aim, she threw the first at the corner of the barn farthest from the cabin. The oil-soaked rags ignited on impact, flames quickly taking hold of the dry wood. Shouts of alarm came from the cabin as the men inside noticed the fire. Two figures burst through the door, running toward the barn. Eleanor used their distraction to circle around to the root cellar entrance. The small, half-concealed door was stiff but yielded to her determined efforts. Eleanor slipped into the dark space beneath her cabin, navigating by memory through the cramped storage area to the interior ladder that led up to the cabin floor. Above her, she could hear footsteps and voices. Blackwood giving orders, his men responding with urgency. The fire had created the desired chaos, but she had only moments before they regained control of the situation. Eleanor positioned herself beneath the trap door, listening intently to track the movements above. When a lull came, she eased the trap door open just enough to peer into the cabin. Gabriel was tied to a chair in the center of the room, his face bloodied, but his eyes alert. Blackwood stood near the door, watching the fire through the window. One guard remained inside, his attention divided between his prisoner and the commotion outside. Eleanor drew her revolver, took a steadying breath, and pushed the trap door fully open. The guard turned at the sound, but too late. Eleanor's first shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him backward. Her second struck his gun hand as he attempted to draw, sending his weapon clattering to the floor. Blackwood whirled at the gunshots, his own revolver appearing in his hand with practiced speed. But Eleanor had already rolled from the cellar opening to the cover of the table, her third shot forcing Blackwood to duck behind the doorframe. "Eleanor, the journal!" Gabriel shouted, straining against his bonds. She knew what he meant. In 3 quick strides, she reached the hearth and pried up the loose stone where they'd hidden Michael's records. Grabbing the leather-bound volume, she turned just as Blackwood launched himself from the doorway, firing as he came. The bullet splintered the wood beside her head. Eleanor returned fire, her fourth shot going wide as she dove behind a cupboard. "It's over, Blackwood," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "The journal is evidence of your crimes. Judge Harmon arrives tomorrow, he'll see justice done. Blackwood's laugh was cold calculated. Justice, do you really think one corrupt judge in a backwater territory can stand against the Central Pacific Railroad against progress? It's not just the judge, Eleanor countered, using the conversation to mask her movement toward Gabriel. Sarah Freeman has witnesses, freedmen whose land you stole, officials you bribed, all ready to testify. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Blackwood's face, the first crack in his confident facade. You're bluffing, he said, but the edge in his voice betrayed his doubt. Using Blackwood's momentary distraction, Eleanor lunged the final distance to Gabriel, pressing her knife into his bound hands. While Blackwood's attention was split between her and the door, watching for his returning men, Gabriel worked to cut himself free. The Lincoln Fund wasn't yours to take, Eleanor continued, keeping Blackwood engaged. It was meant to help former slaves establish themselves under the Homestead Act, to give them a fair chance at the American dream. Fair, Blackwood scoffed. Nothing about land is fair, Mrs. Reed. It belongs to those with the vision to see its value, the strength to take it, and the power to hold it. Like the power you used to murder my husband, Eleanor's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Or Marcus Sullivan. Behind her, she felt Gabriel's bonds give way. He remained seated, waiting for the right moment. Blackwood's smile was a cold thing devoid of humanity. Regrettable necessities. They couldn't see the bigger picture. The railroad is the future of this nation, Mrs. Reed. A few displaced farmers are a small price to pay for progress. And what about the men who fought and died to preserve this union, the freedmen who were promised a new beginning? Eleanor's righteous anger gave her courage she hadn't known she possessed. Was their sacrifice just a regrettable necessity, too? Something shifted in Blackwood's expression, a hardening, a final discarding of pretense. The war is over, Mrs. Reed. The winners write the future, and I intend to be among them. He raised his revolver with deadly intent, but Gabriel was already moving. He launched himself from the chair, tackling Blackwood just as the gun discharged. The bullet went wild, embedding itself in the cabin ceiling. The two men crashed to the floor, grappling for control of the weapon. Gabriel, weakened from his earlier beating, struggled to maintain his advantage. Blackwood was strong, his military training evident in every calculated movement. Eleanor circled the fighting men, her own revolver ready, but she couldn't risk a shot with them so entangled. Outside, she heard shouts as Blackwood's men returned from the barn, attracted by the gunfire. The moment of decision arrived with brutal clarity. She had the journal. She had evidence that could bring Blackwood to justice. But if she stayed, if she tried to help Gabriel, they might both be killed, and the truth would die with them. Gabriel seemed to read her thoughts. Go, he shouted, pinning Blackwood's gun hand to the floor with desperate strength. Get the journal to Sarah, to Judge Harmon. Eleanor hesitated, torn between duty and loyalty. Then Blackwood's men were at the door and the choice was made for her. Clutching the journal to her chest, she bolted for the root cellar. Bullets splintered the wood around her as she dropped through the opening, pulling the trapdoor shut behind her. The darkness below enveloped her as she heard the heavy footsteps of Blackwood's men crossing the cabin floor above. They would find the cellar entrance soon enough. She had to move. Eleanor navigated the cramped space by touch, reaching the external door just as she heard the trapdoor being wrenched open behind her. She burst into the night air, immediately rolling to one side as a bullet struck the ground where she had emerged. Using the darkness and her knowledge of the terrain, Eleanor fled toward the stand of scrub oak where she'd left her horse. Behind her, the ranch erupted into chaos, men shouting gunshots, and above it all, Blackwood's voice ordering them to find her at any cost. The journal was the key. With it, Judge Harmon could issue warrants for Blackwood's arrest. Without it, Blackwood would continue his campaign of theft and murder unchecked. Eleanor reached her horse and mounted quickly, heading not toward Redemption or Sarah Freeman's farm, but north toward the spring where the gold was hidden. She needed to draw Blackwood's men away from town, away from where justice awaited tomorrow. As she rode through the darkness, her thoughts turned to Gabriel left behind to face Blackwood's wrath. She told herself it was the right choice, the necessary choice. The journal had to reach Judge Harmon. But the knowledge that she had abandoned him, however strategically justified, sat like a stone in her chest. The night closed around her, the vast prairie offering both concealment and danger. Eleanor rode hard, the rhythm of hoofbeats matching the pounding of her heart. Behind her, she could hear pursuit. At least two riders, maybe more, following her trail by moonlight. She reached the spring near midnight, the silver light of a three-quarter moon illuminating the small depression with its protective stand of cottonwoods. The horses they'd hidden earlier whinnied softly at her approach, sensing her urgency. Eleanor dismounted quickly, securing her horse before moving to check on the hidden gold. The canvas packs remained undisturbed beneath her fallen log, but she knew they wouldn't stay that way for long. Blackwood's men would search every inch of the surrounding terrain. Taking one pack, enough to serve as proof of the fund's existence, Eleanor concealed the journal inside, wrapping it carefully to protect it from the elements. The rest of the gold she left hidden. It was too heavy to transport quickly, and the journal was the more valuable cargo now. As she prepared to depart, a voice froze her in place. "That's far enough, Mrs. Reed." Eleanor turned slowly to find Maxwell Harding standing at the edge of the spring, a shotgun leveled at her chest. His usual polished appearance had given way to something more practical. Riding clothes, boots caked with mud, and a cold determination in his eyes. "Mr. Harding," she acknowledged, mind racing for options. "I didn't realize land agents worked such late hours." "My interests extend beyond mere land sales," Harding replied, moving closer while keeping the shotgun steady. "As I believe you have discovered. You're working for Blackwood," Eleanor said, "helping him steal land from legitimate homesteaders." Harding's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I prefer to think of it as participating in the greatest engineering achievement of our time. The Transcontinental Railroad will transform this nation, Mrs. Reed. Those who secure their place in its development will reap rewards beyond imagination. At the expense of people who earned their land honestly," Eleanor countered. "People like my husband who followed the law and fulfilled every requirement of the Homestead Act." "Your husband was a fool," Harding said dismissively. "He could have joined us, profited handsomely. Instead, he chose to interfere, to champion lost causes and former slaves who have no business owning land." The casual racism in his tone didn't surprise Eleanor, but it hardened her resolve. This wasn't just about her ranch anymore. It was about everything Michael had believed in, had died for. "The journal, Harding continued, gesturing with the shotgun. "Where is it?" Eleanor remained silent, calculating the distance between them, the weight of the revolver at her hip, the chances of reaching cover before he could fire. "Colonel Blackwood was quite explicit about retrieving it," Harding pressed. "Along with Mr. Winters, you're the only one who knows what it contains." A cold dread settled in Eleanor's stomach. "What have you done with Gabriel?" Harding's expression suggested mild disappointment. "Mr. Winters proved uncooperative despite the colonel's persuasive methods. He's being transported to a more private location for continued questioning." "He doesn't know where the journal is," Eleanor said, trying to buy time. "Only I do." "Then you would be wise to share that information," Harding replied, "before your situation becomes as uncomfortable as his." Eleanor took a step backward, her hand inching toward her revolver. "And if I refuse," Harding sighed as if genuinely regretful, "then I'll be forced to use less civilized means of persuasion. Colonel Blackwood wants that journal, Mrs. Reed. One way or another, he'll have it." "Along with my land," Eleanor added bitterly. "Your land, as you call it, sits at a critical junction for the railroad." Harding explained, his tone taking on the practiced cadence of a sales pitch. "A perfect location for a water stop and supply depot. Its value will increase 100-fold once construction begins." "So all of this, the forged certificates, the threats, the murders, it's all for profit?" Eleanor couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. "Progress requires capital, Mrs. Reed, and capital requires flexibility in how certain regulations are interpreted." Harding's smile turned predatory. "Now the journal. Where is it?" Eleanor knew she was out of time. Harding wouldn't hesitate to shoot her if she refused, and she couldn't allow the journal to fall into Blackwood's hands. Not when it held the key to exposing his crimes. "It's in the barn," she lied, "hidden beneath the floorboards near the north wall." Harding studied her face, searching for signs of deception. "You're lying." "Why would I lie?" Eleanor countered. "You have the shotgun. I have nowhere to run." After a moment's consideration, Harding seemed to accept her logic. "We'll go together. Any tricks and I won't hesitate to use this." He gestured with the shotgun. "Of course," Eleanor agreed, taking another small step backward, putting the fallen log between them. "Though I should warn you, the barn may not be in the best condition. There was a fire. Harding's expression darkened. A distraction that cost us valuable time. Your creativity is becoming problematic, Mrs. Reed. As he stepped forward to close the distance between them, his foot caught on an exposed root. It was a small misstep, a momentary loss of balance, but it was enough. Eleanor drew her revolver and fired in one fluid motion, just as Gabriel had taught her. The shot struck Harding in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The shotgun discharged harmlessly into the ground as he stumbled backwards, shock and pain replacing the confidence in his expression. Eleanor didn't wait for him to recover. She fired again, this time hitting him in the leg. Harding collapsed with a cry of pain, the shotgun falling from his grasp. Moving quickly, Eleanor kicked the weapon beyond his reach, then stood over him, her revolver aimed at his head. "Where is Gabriel?" she demanded. "Where is Blackwood taking him?" Harding clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face contorted with pain and hatred. "You'll never find him in time. The Colonel has methods for dealing with troublemakers." "Tell me," Eleanor cocked the hammer for emphasis. Something in her expression must have convinced Harding of her seriousness. "The old mining camp," he gasped, 10 miles west of Redemption. "But you're too late. By sunrise, Winters will have told Blackwood everything he wants to know, or he'll be dead." Eleanor knew the place. An abandoned settlement from a short-lived silver strike, now little more than crumbling shacks and a few sturdy outbuildings. Remote, isolated, perfect for Blackwood's purposes. "The journal," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "You were right. It wasn't in the barn." Harding's eyes widened as Eleanor pulled the journal from the canvas pack. "It was with the gold all along. The gold your employer stole from freedmen who earned their chance at a new life." "You'll never make it to Redemption alive," Harding snarled. "Blackwood's men are searching every trail, every road." "I don't need to reach Redemption," Eleanor replied, thinking of Sarah Freeman and her network. "Justice has many paths, Mr. Harding, something you and the Colonel seem to have forgotten." Using strips torn from Harding's own shirt, Eleanor bound his wounds, not out of compassion, but necessity. She couldn't leave him to bleed out no matter his crimes. Then she secured him to a tree, gagged to prevent him from calling out to any passing searchers. "Someone will find you," she told him as she mounted her horse. Eventually, with the journal secured and a single pack of gold as evidence, Eleanor rode into the night, but not toward Redemption. She headed west, following a route Michael had shown her years ago, a hunter's trail that skirted the main roads. Gabriel was alive, but for how long remained uncertain. The journal in her possession could bring Blackwood to justice, but only if it reached Judge Harmon by morning. She couldn't be in two places at once. As she rode, the weight of choice pressed down upon her. Save Gabriel, the man who had risked his life to recover Lincoln's stolen legacy, or deliver the evidence that could end Blackwood's reign of terror over countless homesteaders. The answer came to her as the moon reached its zenith, casting long shadows across the rolling prairie. There was a third option, dangerous, perhaps foolhardy, but the only one that honored both her debt to Gabriel and her duty to Michael's memory. Eleanor adjusted her course, heading not directly west toward the mining camp, but southwest toward Sarah Freeman's farm. If anyone could help her succeed at both tasks, it was the woman whose network had been helping freedmen, homesteaders, evade Blackwood's schemes. The night was half gone, and with it precious time. But as Eleanor rode, a fierce determination took root within her. Blackwood had underestimated her, once dismissing her as a helpless widow, easily intimidated into surrendering her land. He would not make that mistake again. But by then, if her plan succeeded, it would be too late. For him, not for her. The gold of forgotten patriots would finally serve its intended purpose. And Eleanor Reed, once fighting merely to keep a promise to her husband, would become the instrument of a justice long delayed. The land might devour the weak, but it also revealed the strong. Tonight she would prove which she truly was. The moon was beginning its descent when Eleanor arrived at the Freeman farm. Unlike her own modest homestead, Sarah's property bore the unmistakable signs of a working farm that had put down roots. Fruit trees in neat rows, a vegetable garden, now harvested for the season, and a sturdy barn that housed not just livestock, but a smithy where Sarah's eldest son practiced his trade. No lamps burned in the windows of the small farmhouse, but Eleanor hadn't expected a welcome. Those who operated in the shadows of the law had learned caution as a means of survival. She approached slowly, making enough noise to announce her presence without calling out. The door opened before she reached the porch steps. Sarah Freeman stood in the doorway, a shotgun held casually but competently in her hands. Behind her, two of her sons, barely into their teens but already tall and wary-eyed, watched from the shadows. "Mrs. Reed," Sarah acknowledged, her expression giving nothing away. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." Eleanor dismounted wearily, the events of the night etched in the dust and blood on her clothing. "Blackwood's men came to the ranch. They have Gabriel." Sarah's posture shifted subtly, not relaxing but adjusting to new information. "Come inside. Eyes are everywhere, even at night." The interior of the Freeman home was simple but meticulously maintained. A few books on shelves, handmade quilts on the beds visible through an open door, and walls adorned with pressed flowers and frames. The domestic touches of a family that had carved stability from chaos. "Marcus, keep watch," Sarah instructed her eldest son. "Jacob, tend to Mrs. Reed's horse." The boys moved with quiet efficiency, disappearing into the night without question or complaint. Sarah gestured Eleanor toward the kitchen table, where a single lantern cast a pool of warm light. "You have it?" Sarah asked once they were seated. Eleanor withdrew Michael's journal from inside her coat. "And one pack of the gold is evidence. The rest is still hidden at the spring." Sarah took the journal with reverent care, her fingers tracing the worn leather binding. Michael Reed was a meticulous man. Every name, every amount, every location, all recorded in his particular code. Her eyes met Eleanor's. "This is enough to destroy Blackwood and his entire operation." "If it reaches Judge Harmon," Eleanor said, "but that's only half of what I came for. Gabriel is being held at the old mining camp west of Redemption. Blackwood's questioning him." Sarah's expression darkened at the implications of questioning. "By dawn, he'll either have told Blackwood everything or he'll be dead." "I need to reach him before then," Eleanor said, "but I also need to ensure the journal gets to Judge Harmon." "You can't be in two places at once, Mrs. Reed." "No, but with your help, I won't have to be." Sarah studied her face for a long moment, assessing not just her words but the determination behind them. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Your network," Eleanor said simply, "the same one that's been helping freedmen secure their homesteads despite Blackwood's interference. You have people in Redemption, people who can get this journal to Judge Harmon without attracting attention. And while my people deliver the journal, you plan to rescue Mr. Winters from a camp full of armed men." Sarah's tone made her skepticism clear. "That's not courage, Mrs. Reed. That's suicide." "Not if I have help," Eleanor countered. "Not if I have a plan." Sarah set the journal on the table between them, her decision evident in the deliberate movement. "Tell me this plan, then, and make it good, because I don't send my people to dying for lost causes." For the next hour they spoke in low, urgent tones, refining Eleanor's initial idea into something with at least a chance of success. Sarah provided information Eleanor couldn't have known. The layout of the mining camp, which buildings Blackwood was likely to use, how many men he typically kept in his employ. "There's something you should know," Sarah said as they finalized the details. "Judge Harmon isn't just coming to hear routine cases. He was specifically requested by Governor Evans to investigate complaints about land seizures along the proposed railroad route." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Someone's already building a case against Blackwood." "Several someones," Sarah confirmed, "including your husband before his death. Michael had been corresponding with the governor's office for months, documenting the pattern of forged certificates and intimidation." "He never told me," Eleanor said softly, a mixture of pride and sorrow coloring her voice. "He was protecting you," Sarah replied. "The less you knew, the safer you were." Or so he thought. The revelation settled over Eleanor like a physical weight. Michael had been fighting a secret war all along, one that had ultimately cost him his life. Yet even in death, he had prepared the way for justice. The journal was his final testimony. "Dawn's approaching," Sarah noted, glancing toward the window where the first faint lightening of the eastern sky was visible. "If we're going to move, it has to be now." Eleanor nodded, gathering her resolve for what lay ahead. "Your sons will take the journal to Redemption. Jacob and Thomas will go. Marcus stays with me." Sarah's tone brooked no argument. "We'll meet you at the ridge overlooking the mining camp in 1 hour." Eleanor hadn't expected Sarah to involve herself directly. "This isn't just your fight, Mrs. Reed." Sarah's eyes held generations of determined resistance. Blackwood has stolen land from 12 freedmen families in this territory alone. My husband's cousin was beaten nearly to death for refusing to sell. This reckoning has been coming for a long time. As Sarah called her sons in to give them their instructions, Eleanor found herself reevaluating the quiet, dignified woman before her. Sarah Freeman was not merely an ally of convenience. She was a general in a war Eleanor had only recently discovered. Within minutes, Jacob and Thomas had departed for redemption by separate routes, each carrying a copy of the most damning pages from Michael's journal, a precaution against the failure of either messenger. The original remained with Sarah, too valuable to risk until Judge Harmon's arrival was confirmed. Eleanor and Sarah, accompanied by the stoic Marcus, set out for the mining camp as the first pre-dawn light painted the horizon in shades of pearl and lavender. They rode in silence, each absorbed in private thoughts and preparations for what lay ahead. The abandoned mining camp appeared on the horizon just as the sun crested the eastern plains. A collection of weathered structures clustered in a natural depression, surrounded by the skeletal remains of operations that had failed when the silver vein proved less bountiful than hoped. From their vantage point on a ridge half a mile away, Eleanor could make out signs of occupation. Two horses tethered outside what had once been the assay office, thin smoke rising from the chimney of the largest building, and most tellingly a sentry positioned on the roof of what appeared to be a storage shed. "Blackwood's there," Sarah murmured, lowering the field glasses she'd been using to survey the camp. "That's his gelding by the assay office." "How many men can you see?" Eleanor asked, mentally adjusting their plan based on the intelligence. "4, maybe 5. The sentry, 2 by the main building, and movement inside." Sarah passed the field glasses to Eleanor. "You're Mr. Winters is likely in the old supervisor's office, the stone building to the north. It's the only one with a secure cellar." Eleanor studied the layout, noting approaches cover and potential escape routes. The plan they'd formulated at the Freeman farm would need modification, but the basic strategy remained sound. "We need a distraction," she said finally, "something to draw their attention away from the north side of the camp." Marcus, who had been silently observing the camp, spoke for the first time. "The old powder magazine is still there." He pointed to a small structure set apart from the main buildings. Mining camp that size would have kept blasting powder on hand. "After 10 years, Eleanor questioned, "wouldn't it have been taken when the mine closed?" "Depends on how hastily they left," Sarah replied, considering the possibility. "If the vein played out suddenly—" "Worth checking," Eleanor decided, "but we need to move quickly. Once Judge Harmon reaches redemption, Blackwood will know his time is running out." They left their horses concealed in a stand of scrub oak and approached the camp on foot, using the uneven terrain for cover. The sentry maintained a desultory watch, more focused on the trail from redemption than the seemingly empty land to the north. Eleanor led their small group in a wide arc that brought them to the crumbling remains of an ore processing shed. From this position, they had a clear view of the supervisor's office, where Gabriel was likely being held. 2 armed men stood guard outside the stone building, confirming their suspicions about its importance. Through a window, Eleanor caught glimpses of movement. A third man pacing his posture, suggesting authority and impatience. Blackwood. Her hand moved instinctively to the revolver at her hip, the temptation to end this now with one well-placed shot nearly overwhelming. But the distance was too great, the angle wrong, and the consequences of failure too dire. "The powder magazine," she whispered. "How do we reach it without being seen?" Marcus pointed to a dry creek bed that ran behind the processing shed. "That leads almost to its door. But if there is powder, it'll be degraded, unstable. One wrong move." "I'll go," Sarah said decisively. "I've handled volatile materials before. My father was a blaster for the railroad." Eleanor wanted to object, but recognized the logic. Sarah had the experience, and with her darker complexion, she would be less visible against the shadowed creek bed than Eleanor. 20 minutes, Sarah instructed. "Get in position, but wait for my signal. When it comes, it will be unmistakable." With a nod to her son, Sarah slipped away, moving with a grace that belied her years. Eleanor and Marcus continued their careful approach toward the supervisor's office, using every bit of available cover. As they drew nearer, voices became audible. First indistinct murmurs, then clear words carried on the still morning air. "Your stubbornness is becoming tiresome, Mr. Winters." Blackwood's cultured tones were unmistakable. "The widow can't have gone far with the journal." My men will find her, and then your gallantry will have been for nothing. A hoarse laugh that Eleanor recognized as Gabriel's followed. You still don't understand what you're facing, do you, Colonel? It's not just the journal. It's not just me or Mrs. Reed. It's a reckoning that's been coming since you first betrayed your oath. The sound of a blow followed then Blackwood's voice tight with controlled rage. My oath was to preserve the Union, which I did. What came after, the misguided attempts to elevate former slaves to positions they're ill-equipped to handle the squandering of resources on lost causes, that was never part of my duty. Lincoln thought differently, Gabriel replied, his voice weaker but still defiant. The fund was his vision, a chance for freedmen to become true citizens through honest labor on their own land. Lincoln was a dreamer, Blackwood scoffed. Dreamers don't build nations. Men of action do. Men who understand that progress requires sacrifice. Is that what you tell yourself? Gabriel's tone was scathing despite his obvious pain. That murdering Michael Reed and Marcus Sullivan was sacrifice for the greater good. Eleanor felt Marcus stiffen beside her at the mention of his namesake. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, silently urging patience. Their moment would come. Reed was an unfortunate necessity, Blackwood replied dismissively. He could have joined us, profited handsomely from his knowledge of the territory. Instead, he chose to champion lost causes. Like his wife, Gabriel challenged. Another unfortunate necessity in your grand design. A pause, then Blackwood's voice considering. Mrs. Reed has proven more resourceful than anticipated, a quality I might have admired under different circumstances. Eleanor used their conversation as cover to move closer, reaching the side of the stone building undetected. Marcus followed, his young face set in grim determination. Through a small window, she caught her first glimpse of Gabriel. He was secured to a chair in the center of the room, his face bruised and bloody, but his eyes alert. Blackwood stood before him, immaculate as always in his tailored coat, looking more like a businessman concluding a deal than a man overseeing torture. A third man, burly with a knife visible in his belt, stood nearby, clearly the one responsible for Gabriel's condition. Of the guards outside, there was no sign from her position, but Eleanor knew they remained a threat. We need to get closer, she whispered to Marcus. When your mother's distraction comes, we'll have only moments to act. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the scene through the window. The back door, he murmured, used to be a loading area for ore samples. Should lead directly into that room. They circled the building, finding the door Marcus had described, weathered but solid, likely barred from within. Eleanor studied it, calculating force and angles, knowing they would have to breach it quickly when the moment came. Inside, Blackwood's interrogation continued. One last time, Mr. Winters. Where is the journal? Where has Mrs. Reed gone with it? Gabriel's laugh held genuine amusement despite his circumstances. You know, for a man so concerned with progress, you're remarkably blind to what's happening around you. Meaning what exactly? Blackwood's patience was clearly fraying. Meaning the world you're trying to build. One where men like you can steal with impunity, where justice is just a word. That world is already ending. Gabriel straightened in his chair, a renewed strength in his voice. The journal isn't just evidence, Colonel. It's a testament. And it's already in the hands of people who will ensure it serves its purpose, with or without me. Blackwood stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You seem to have developed quite an attachment to the widow, Mr. Winters. Perhaps that's a vulnerability we haven't fully explored. Before Gabriel could respond, the morning stillness was shattered by an explosion that shook the ground beneath their feet. A plume of smoke and debris erupted from the direction of the powder magazine, followed by secondary explosions, as ancient blasting caps detonated in a chain reaction. Sarah's distraction had arrived with devastating effectiveness. Shouts of alarm filled the camp as Blackwood's men rushed toward the source of the explosion. Through the window, Eleanor saw Blackwood himself hesitate, torn between investigating the commotion and continuing his interrogation. Secure the prisoner, he ordered the burly man. I'll deal with this. The moment Blackwood exited through the front door, Eleanor and Marcus made their move. Using a fallen beam as a battering ram, they struck the rear door with coordinated force. The aged wood splintered around the rusty bar that secured it, creating an opening just large enough to squeeze through. Eleanor entered, first revolver raised, to find Gabriel's guard already turning toward the sound, his own weapon halfway from its holster. Don't, she warned, her aim unwavering. The man froze, assessing his options and apparently finding them wanting. The colonel won't let you leave this camp alive, he said slowly, raising his hands. The colonel has bigger problems right now, Eleanor replied. She gestured with her revolver. Against the wall, hands where I can see them. As the guard complied, Marcus slipped through the broken door and moved swiftly to Gabriel, using a knife to cut his bonds. Eleanor. Gabriel's voice was rough with emotion and relief. How did you, later? She cut him off, keeping her attention on the guard. Can you walk? Gabriel stood unsteadily, his injuries evident in every movement, but his determination clear. I can do whatever needs doing. Good. Eleanor tossed him the guard's revolver, which Marcus had retrieved. Because we're not out of this yet. Outside, the chaos from the explosion continued. Men shouting, the crackle of secondary fires, and commands being issued in Blackwood's authoritative voice. The distraction was effective, but wouldn't last long. We need to move, Eleanor urged, securing the guard with his own belt and bandana. Sarah will meet us at the eastern rim. They exited through the shattered rear door, Gabriel leaning heavily on Marcus for support as they navigated the uneven ground behind the building. The smoke from the explosion provided additional cover, allowing them to reach the shelter of a collapsed sluiceway undetected. Sarah Freeman is helping you, Gabriel asked as they paused to assess their next move. Her and half the territory, apparently, Eleanor replied. Michael had been building a case against Blackwood for months. Judge Harmon is in redemption by now, with copies of the journal. Relief washed over Gabriel's battered face. Then we've won. Even if we don't make it out of here, Blackwood's finished. I didn't go through all this just to leave you behind, Eleanor said firmly. We're all walking out of here, together. Their escape route led past the assay office where the horses were tethered, a necessary risk if they hoped to outrun pursuit. As they approached, keeping low and using the buildings for cover, a shout from behind confirmed their fears. The prisoners gone, check the perimeter. The guard they'd left bound had managed to raise the alarm. Their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The horses, Gabriel urged, it's our only chance. They made a final dash across open ground, Gabriel summoning reserves of strength born of desperation. Eleanor provided covering fire, forcing Blackwood's men to seek shelter rather than pursue immediately. Marcus reached the horses first, quickly untying the reins and calming the animals which had grown skittish from the commotion. As Eleanor and Gabriel arrived, he helped boost Gabriel onto the larger of the two horses. Both of you go, Eleanor directed. I'll hold them off until you're clear. Not a chance, Gabriel objected. We leave together or not at all. The debate was rendered moot as a bullet struck the ground at their feet, followed by Blackwood's voice cold with fury. That's quite far enough, Mrs. Reed. Eleanor turned to find Blackwood, himself standing 30 yards away, a rifle aimed steadily at her heart. Behind him, 3 of his men had taken positions, cutting off any route of escape. Your freedwoman friend created quite a diversion. Blackwood continued, his composure regained despite the chaos around them. Ingenious if futile. It served its purpose, Eleanor replied, keeping her revolver ready but not raised. Any sudden movement would mean death. For her, and likely for Gabriel and Marcus as well. Did it? Blackwood seemed almost amused. You've rescued your champion, I'll grant you that. But to what end? You're still surrounded, outnumbered, and far from any help. You're wrong about that, Colonel, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Help is already here. Blackwood's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. An empty bluff, Mrs. Reed. There's no one within miles of this camp except my men. Judge Harmon reached redemption at dawn, she countered. By now he has the journal and testimonies from a dozen freedmen whose land you stole. The governor himself requested the investigation. This was a calculated gamble. Eleanor had no way of knowing if Jacob and Thomas had successfully delivered their evidence or if Judge Harmon had acted upon it. But the effect on Blackwood was immediate and gratifying. His confident facade cracked, revealing the desperate calculation beneath. Even if that were true, he said after a moment, dead witnesses tell no tales. And accidents befall judges on remote frontier circuits with regrettable frequency. You'd murder a federal judge, Gabriel asked incredulously. Even for you, Blackwood, that's madness. Not murder, Blackwood corrected. A tragic encounter with desperate outlaws. The same outlaws who killed the Reed widow and the bounty hunter who'd been tracking them. His gaze hardened. History is written by survivors, Mr. Winters. A lesson you failed to learn. The stalemate stretched, tension mounting with each passing second. Eleanor knew they couldn't outshoot Blackwood and his men, not in their current position. But surrender meant certain death. A distant sound broke the silence. Hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the direction of redemption. Blackwood's head turned slightly, his attention divided. It was the opening Eleanor had been waiting for. Now, she shouted, dropping to one knee and firing in a single motion. Her shot caught Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him backward and sending the rifle flying from his grasp. Gabriel, despite his injuries, managed to mount a defense firing at the men who had begun to advance. Marcus, showing the quick thinking that had kept his family alive in hostile territory, slapped the rump of the second horse, sending it galloping directly toward Blackwood's men and forcing them to scatter. "Go," Eleanor urged, continuing to provide covering fire as Gabriel and Marcus mounted the remaining horse. "I'll be right behind you." The approaching hoofbeats were louder now, almost upon them. Eleanor risked a glance over her shoulder to see riders cresting the rise. At least a dozen men led by a figure she recognized from town meetings and court sessions. Judge Harmon had arrived, bringing with him what appeared to be a hastily assembled posse of Redemption citizens. Among them, Eleanor spotted Sarah Freeman riding alongside the judge, her face set in grim satisfaction. The tide had turned so completely that Blackwood's remaining men threw down their weapons without further resistance. Only Blackwood himself continued to fight, retrieving a revolver from his coat and taking aim at Eleanor with murderous intent. "Eleanor!" Gabriel's warning shout came simultaneously with the crack of a rifle from the newly arrived posse. Blackwood staggered, a look of genuine surprise crossing his features as he registered the bullet wound in his chest. He dropped to his knees, the revolver falling from nerveless fingers. "Impossible," he gasped, blood staining his immaculate coat. "The railroad, progress." "Justice," Eleanor corrected, approaching him cautiously. "Something you forgot existed." Blackwood's eyes fixed on her, clarity returning briefly through the encroaching haze of death. "You think you've won," he whispered, "but men like me were already building the future. This changes nothing." "It changes everything for the people whose land you stole," Eleanor replied, "for the families of the men you killed." A bubble of blood formed at the corner of Blackwood's mouth as he struggled for his final words. "Ask Winters about Reed. Ask him what he knew." Then the light faded from his eyes, and Colonel Charles Blackwood, former Union officer, railroad investor, and architect of a criminal land-grabbing scheme, collapsed into the dust of the abandoned mining camp. The aftermath unfolded with a strange mixture of urgency and formality that accompanies violent death on the frontier. Judge Harmon, a lean, weathered man with the penetrating gaze of one accustomed to separating truth from falsehood, took charge, immediately directing the securing of surviving prisoners and the collection of statements. Eleanor found herself explaining the events of the past days to the judge as a doctor from Redemption tended to Gabriel's injuries. Sarah Freeman provided corroborating testimony, producing the original journal as evidence of Blackwood's crimes. "Read," Judge Harmon said when she had finished her account, "what you've endured is extraordinary. Your husband would be proud of your courage." "Michael started this fight," Eleanor replied simply. "I merely finished it." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "The evidence you have provided, combined with the testimonies we've already collected, will be sufficient to prosecute Blackwood's surviving associates and invalidate any land transfers conducted under fraudulent terms." He glanced toward where Gabriel sat, bandaged but alert. "And the gold?" "Still hidden," Eleanor confirmed. "But I can take you to it. It belongs to the freedmen homesteaders who were meant to receive it." "A complicated matter," the judge mused. "Technically, government funds, even those allocated by a president, remain subject to congressional oversight. However," he stroked his beard thoughtfully, "given the unique circumstances and the clear documentation in your husband's journal, I believe we can honor Lincoln's original intent." Relief washed over Eleanor. The gold would serve its intended purpose, after all. As the impromptu legal proceedings continued, Gabriel approached, moving stiffly but under his own power. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "we need to talk, privately." Something in his tone, a gravity beyond the circumstances, sent a chill through her. Blackwood's dying words echoed in her mind. "Ask Winters about Reed." They walked a short distance from the others, finding a measure of privacy beside the crumbling wall of what had once been the mining company's office. What Blackwood said, Gabriel began, his expression troubled. About Michael. There's something you need to know. Eleanor steeled herself. You were there when he died. It wasn't an accident. Gabriel looked startled. You knew? I suspected, she clarified. The circumstances never made sense. Michael was too experienced a rider to be thrown from his horse on familiar ground. But I didn't know for certain until Blackwood confirmed it. There's more to it, Gabriel said, his voice dropping lower. Something I've needed to tell you since I arrived at your ranch. Eleanor felt the world narrowing to this moment to whatever truth Gabriel had been carrying. Tell me now, then. Gabriel drew a deep breath, visibly gathering his courage. I didn't just know of Michael Reed. I knew him. We worked together in the Freedmen's Network. He was my contact in this territory. This wasn't entirely surprising given what Eleanor had learned, but she sensed Gabriel was building to something more significant. When Marcus discovered evidence of Blackwood's scheme, I brought it to Michael first. Gabriel continued. We met at Redemption, planned our next steps. I thought we were careful, but understanding dawned with sickening clarity. Blackwood followed you to Michael. Gabriel nodded, unable to meet her eyes. I led them right to him, never saw them tracking me. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. Michael was already dead staged to look like an accident. The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Gabriel, the man she had sheltered, fought alongside, even begun to care for, had inadvertently caused her husband's death. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. At first because I needed your help, Gabriel admitted. Later because, he hesitated, searching for words, because I saw in you the same courage, the same commitment to justice that Michael had, and I couldn't bear to see that turn to hatred. Eleanor processed this emotions warring within her, anger at the deception, grief freshly awakened, and a complicated empathy for the burden Gabriel had carried. There's one more thing, Gabriel said, the most important thing. He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a folded paper stained and worn, but carefully preserved. Michael gave me this the last time I saw him, said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you received it. Eleanor took the paper with trembling hands, unfolding it to reveal Michael's familiar handwriting, a letter addressed to her dated just days before his death. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I've become another casualty in a war most don't even know is being fought. I'm sorry for the secrets I've kept from you, not out of lack of trust, but from a desire to protect you from dangers I chose to face. The work I've been doing, helping freedmen secure their rightful land, documenting Blackwood's crimes, it's dangerous but necessary. The America I fought for isn't just about preserved union, but about the promise of equality and opportunity for all its citizens. If I'm gone, you'll face pressure to sell our land. Don't. It's more valuable than you know, not just for its location along the railroad's path, but for what it represents. A promise kept, a future earned through honest labor. Gabriel Winters is a good man, though he carries his own burdens. If circumstances bring him to you, trust him as I did. Together, you may accomplish what I could not alone. Remember that I loved you not just for the woman you were when we met, but for the woman I always knew you could become, strong enough to stand when others fall, brave enough to fight when others flee. All my love, Michael. Eleanor read the letter twice, tears blurring her vision, but not falling. Michael had known the risks, had prepared for the worst, had in his way given his blessing to the very partnership that had brought his killers to justice. He knew, she said softly. He knew what might happen, and he continued anyway. Because he believed in something greater than himself, Gabriel replied. The same thing that kept you fighting for your land when everyone expected you to give up. Eleanor carefully refolded the letter, tucking it into her own pocket. Blackwood thought he was building the future, but it was Michael all along, and others like him. People who understood that true progress isn't measured in railroad miles or stock dividends, but in justice done and promises kept. She looked up at Gabriel, seeing him fully now, not as her husband's inadvertent betrayer, but as his chosen ally, a man who had risked everything to complete what Michael had started. What will you do now, she asked, with Blackwood gone and the gold recovered? Gabriel glanced toward where Judge Harmon was organizing the transport of prisoners back to Redemption. There are other Blackwoods out there, other schemes to dispossess those who've earned their place on this frontier. The work isn't finished. No, Eleanor agreed, I don't suppose it ever is. The sun had reached its zenith, casting stark shadows across the abandoned camp. In the distance, Sarah Freeman was mounting her horse, her son Marcus beside her, their part in this chapter of frontier justice complete. My ranch sits at a critical junction for the railroad, Eleanor said thoughtfully. The perfect location for a water stop and supply depot, according to Harding. Gabriel raised an eyebrow, uncertain where she was leading. That's true. The land's value will increase considerably once construction begins. Then perhaps it should serve a greater purpose than just my homestead, Eleanor decided. A place where freedmen travelers can find safe harbor, where those fighting for their land rights can meet and organize. Caleb's Station, Gabriel murmured, recalling the code name Sarah had used. A fitting tribute to what Michael started. Eleanor nodded, a sense of rightness settling over her. The ranch would remain hers, the homestead certificate honored, but its purpose would expand, becoming not just a home but a bastion of the very justice Michael had died seeking. And you, she asked Gabriel directly, will you continue your work alone? The question hung between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Gabriel held her gaze, his expression softening from the hardened vigilance that had characterized him since his arrival. That depends, he said quietly, on whether I'm welcome to return to a certain ranch once our business here is concluded. Eleanor thought of Michael's letter, of his implicit blessing, of the days ahead rebuilding not just a homestead but a legacy. The land had taken much from her husband, her security, nearly her life. But it had also revealed her strength, her capacity for justice, and perhaps the possibility of a new beginning. The ranch could use a skilled hand, she replied, the ghost of a smile touching her lips, especially one that understands what we're fighting for. As they walked back to join the others, Eleanor felt the weight of the past days, of fear and violence, of revelation and loss, begin to ease. The horizon stretched before them, vast and open, much like the future they would help build. A future where the gold of forgotten patriots would finally serve its intended purpose, bringing Lincoln's vision of opportunity to those who had earned their place on the American frontier through sacrifice and perseverance. A future where justice, though delayed, was not ultimately denied. The journey back to redemption carried none of the desperate urgency of their earlier travels. Judge Harmon's posse, now serving as both escort and guard for Blackwood's surviving men, moved at a deliberate pace through the late morning heat. Eleanor rode alongside Gabriel, their horses matching strides as naturally as their shared purpose had aligned. Tell me about Marcus Sullivan, Eleanor said after they had ridden in companionable silence for some time. Michael never mentioned him. Gabriel's expression softened with memory. Marcus was a railway engineer, brilliant with numbers, terrible with people. The kind of man who saw the world as a series of problems to be solved. A faint smile touched his lips. He could calculate the precise grade needed for a stretch of track in his head, but couldn't remember to eat unless someone reminded him. How did he discover Blackwood's scheme? The way engineers discover anything, through discrepancies in the data. Gabriel adjusted his position in the saddle, wincing slightly as the movement aggravated his injuries. Marcus was reviewing survey maps for the transcontinental route when he noticed inconsistencies, slight alterations in the proposed path that didn't make engineering sense. Changes that increased the value of certain parcels of land, Eleanor guessed. Gabriel nodded. Land that had recently changed hands from homesteaders to shell companies. Marcus started tracking the transactions, found a pattern. Then he discovered something even more damning. Financial records showing large cash payments flowing through those same companies. The gold, Eleanor said. Blackwood was using Lincoln's fund to finance his land scheme. Exactly, but Marcus needed proof, and more importantly, he needed allies. Gabriel's expression darkened. That's when he came to me, and I took him to Michael. The admission hung between them, a painful truth neither could ignore, but both understood in the context of a larger struggle. What was he like? Eleanor asked after a moment. As a partner, Gabriel seemed surprised by the question. Marcus driven, meticulous, utterly convinced that numbers don't lie even when people do. He paused, considering. He wasn't fighting for abstract principles like justice or equality. For him, it was about integrity, The fundamental wrongness of corrupting systems meant to serve the public good. And Michael, Eleanor pressed gently, what was he like when he worked with you? Gabriel studied her face, recognizing the deeper question beneath her words. Determined, strategic, always thinking 3 moves ahead. His voice softened. But there was something else, something I didn't understand until I met you. Everything he did, every risk he took, was informed by his love for you and the life you were building together. He wasn't just fighting for others' homes, he was fighting for yours. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes, but she blinked them away, focusing instead on the horizon where redemption had appeared as a distant cluster of buildings. Thank you, she said simply, for telling me that. As they approached the town, Eleanor could see unusual activity. Riders coming and going, small groups gathered in animated conversation outside the saloon and general store. News of Blackwood's death and the confrontation at the mining camp had clearly preceded them. Judge Harmon, who had been riding at the head of their procession, dropped back to join Eleanor and Gabriel. Mrs. Reed, Mr. Winters, I suggest you prepare yourselves. Word of this morning's events has spread, and redemption is not known for its restraint in matters of local drama. Will there be trouble? Gabriel asked, his hand instinctively moving toward his revolver. Not of the violent sort, the judge assured him, but Blackwood had allies in town, businessmen who stood to profit from his scheme's officials who looked the other way. They'll be watching, assessing the new reality. And the freedmen families, Eleanor asked. Those who lost their land, already gathering, the judge replied with a satisfied nod. Sarah Freeman's network has been remarkably efficient. We'll have statements from at least 8 families by evening, each documenting how their homestead claims were invalidated through fraud or coercion. The main street of redemption opened before them, lined with townsfolk, whose expressions ranged from openly curious to carefully neutral. Eleanor recognized faces she had seen only in passing during her infrequent visits. The blacksmith, the telegraph operator, the preacher's wife. Strangers connected to her now by the extraordinary events of the past days. As they reached the center of town, a small delegation awaited them. The mayor, a round, perspiring man named Hollister, flanked by the town marshal and a distinguished-looking gentleman Eleanor didn't recognize. Judge Harmon, Mayor Hollister called out, his tone effusively, welcoming despite the tension evident in his posture. We've prepared the town hall for your proceedings as requested. Thank you, Mayor, the judge replied formally. I trust accommodations have also been arranged for the prisoners. The jail has been cleared, Your Honor. Marshal Dawson will oversee their confinement personally. The distinguished gentleman stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. Mrs. Reed, I presume William Claiborne at your service. It was very service. I represent the governor's office in matters pertaining to land administration. Eleanor acknowledged him with a cautious nod. Mr. Claiborne, your husband's correspondence with our office has proven invaluable, Claiborne continued. Governor Evans has taken a personal interest in this case. The implications for territorial development are significant. Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion near the general store drew their attention. Maxwell Harding, somehow transported from the spring where Eleanor had left him bound, was being escorted down the street by 2 men she recognized from Sarah Freeman's network. Harding's shoulder and leg were roughly bandaged, his usually immaculate appearance reduced to dishevelment and humiliation. His eyes met Eleanor's with undisguised hatred as he was marched past their position toward the jail. Another of Blackwood's associates, I understand, Claiborne noted, his tone deceptively mild. The governor will be particularly interested in his testimony regarding fraudulent land transactions. If he chooses to provide it, Judge Harmon replied, though I suspect Mr. Harding will find cooperation preferable to the alternatives before him. The formalities of their arrival continued. Horses, stabled prisoners, secured quarters, arranged for Eleanor and Gabriel at the town's modest hotel. Through it all, Eleanor maintained the composed dignity that had become her armor, even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. It was late afternoon when she finally found herself alone in a small but clean hotel room, the events of the past days crashing over her in waves now that the immediate danger had passed. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, Michael's letter clutched in her hands, and allowed herself a moment of vulnerability that she had denied in the presence of others. The tears, when they came, were not solely for grief or relief, but for the complex amalgamation of emotions that had no simple name: loss and discovery, endings and beginnings, the price of justice and the value of truth. A gentle knock at the door roused her from her reverie. Composing herself quickly, Eleanor crossed the room, expecting perhaps the hotel proprietor or Judge Harmon with additional questions. Instead, she found Sarah Freeman, her usual practical attire exchanged for a simple but well-made dress that marked this as an official visit rather than a clandestine meeting. "Mrs. Freeman," Eleanor said, surprise evident in her voice. "Please come in." Sarah entered her gaze, taking in the room with the same efficient assessment she had applied to the mining camp. "Judge Harmon has called for testimonies to begin at 7 this evening," she said without preamble. "I thought you might wish to know that 12 freedmen families have already come forward, along with 4 white homesteaders who lost land to Blackwood's schemes." "That's more than we anticipated," Eleanor noted, gesturing for Sarah to take the room's only chair while she returned to her seat on the bed. "Word travels," Sarah replied simply, "especially when it carries hope." She paused, studying Eleanor with perceptive eyes. "You've read Michael's letter." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor nodded confirmation. He knew the risks, had prepared for them. "As did many who fought the quieter battles after the war ended," Sarah said. "The battles for what the victory should mean." A rare smile softened her usually stoic features. "Michael spoke of you often during our meetings. He was proud of the strength he saw in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." "You knew him well, then," Eleanor said, a new understanding dawning. "Well enough to trust him with the lives of my people," Sarah confirmed. "The network that helped freedmen secure their homestead claims. Michael was a central figure in its operations here. His maps, his knowledge of land, law, his connections with sympathetic officials, all were invaluable." Eleanor absorbed this, piecing together a more complete image of the man she had loved. "And the gold, did he know about Lincoln's fund?" Sarah's expression turned cautious. "He knew of its existence, of its intended purpose. But the details of its disappearance came later through Marcus Sullivan and then Gabriel. That's why Blackwood killed him." Eleanor said, the final piece falling into place. "Not just because Michael was helping freedmen, homesteaders, but because he could connect Blackwood to the missing gold." "A dangerous combination of knowledge," Sarah agreed, "made more dangerous by Michael's methodical documentation." She nodded toward the letter in Eleanor's hands. "What will you do now, Mrs. Reed, after the testimonies, after the judgments?" The question was one Eleanor had been asking herself since the confrontation at the mining camp. The simple goal that had driven her, holding on to her land, honoring Michael's memory, had expanded into something far larger, with implications beyond her small corner of the territory. "I'll return to my ranch," she said after a moment's reflection. "Complete the proving up period, secure the final deed." Her gaze met Sarah's, steady and resolved. "But the land will serve a greater purpose than I originally intended. Michael began something important. I intend to continue it." Sarah nodded approval, evident in her posture. "Caleb's station, a fitting tribute." "More than a tribute," Eleanor clarified. "A commitment to ensure that what Michael fought for, what Lincoln envisioned with his fund, continues despite Blackwood's interference." "And Gabriel Winters," Sarah asked, her tone carefully neutral, "will he have a place in this commitment?" The question touched on emotions Eleanor wasn't yet ready to fully examine. "Michael trusted him," she said simply. "That counts for something, even considering his role in what happened." "Guilt is a powerful motivator," Sarah observed, "but a poor foundation for whatever might come next." "I'm not looking for foundations," Eleanor replied. "Not yet, just possibilities." Sarah accepted this with a nod, rising from her chair with the fluid grace that characterized her movements. 7 o'clock town hall. Judge Harmon will want to hear your testimony first as the primary witness to Blackwood's confession. As Sarah reached the door, she paused, turning back with an expression softened by something like compassion. "One more thing, Mrs. Reed, about Michael's letter." Eleanor looked up questioningly. "He wrote one to me as well," Sarah said quietly, "with instructions for what to do if certain events came to pass, including the arrival of a wounded man with connections to the missing gold." A faint smile touched her lips. "Your meeting with Gabriel Winters wasn't entirely the coincidence it appeared to be." With that enigmatic statement, Sarah departed, leaving Eleanor to contemplate yet another layer of Michael's foresight, and the possibility that even in death he had been guiding events toward their current resolution. The Town Hall of Redemption was a modest structure that served multiple functions, meeting place courthouse, an occasional venue for dances and community gatherings. By 7 o'clock that evening, it had been transformed into an impromptu tribunal with Judge Harmon seated at a table on the raised platform normally reserved for musical performances. The hall was filled beyond capacity with townspeople, homesteaders, and curious onlookers crowded onto the wooden benches. At the front, a section had been reserved for those scheduled to testify while Blackwood's surviving associates, including Maxwell Harding, sat under guard to one side. Eleanor took her place in the witness chair, aware of the weight of attention focused upon her. Judge Harmon, now attired in the formal black coat of his office, nodded encouragingly. "Mrs. Eleanor Reed," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "You have been asked to testify regarding the events leading to the death of Colonel Charles Blackwood and the recovery of certain assets allegedly misappropriated from government funds. Please state for the record your understanding of these matters." For the next hour, Eleanor recounted the extraordinary sequence of events: Gabriel's arrival during the storm, the discovery of the gold Blackwood's attack on her ranch, and the final confrontation at the mining camp. She spoke clearly and precisely, omitting nothing of significance, while maintaining the dignified composure that had become her hallmark. When she described Michael's journal and its detailed records of Lincoln's freedmen, a murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. The implications extended far beyond local land disputes into matters of national policy and historical significance. "And you're prepared to testify that Colonel Blackwood explicitly confessed to the murder of Michael Reed and Marcus Sullivan?" Judge Harmon asked as her testimony neared its conclusion. "I am," Eleanor confirmed. "He stated clearly that their deaths were unfortunate necessities in the advancement of his scheme. He expressed no remorse, only pragmatic justification for eliminating those who threatened his operation." The judge made a notation in the record before him. "And the gold, you can lead representatives to its location?" "Yes, Your Honor. It remains hidden where Mr. Winters and I concealed it, with the exception of one pack that was brought as evidence." Judge Harmon turned to William Claiborne, who had been observing the proceedings with keen attention. "The governor's office will need to consult with the War Department regarding the disposition of these funds. Given their original purpose and the extensive documentation provided by Michael Reed's journal, there may be grounds for honoring President Lincoln's intentions despite the irregular circumstances." Claiborne nodded agreement. "Governor Evans has already telegraphed Washington on this matter. Given the sensitive nature of the fund's existence and the political implications of its discovery, he anticipates a flexible interpretation of applicable statutes." The legal language masked a simple truth. The government would likely allow the gold to serve its intended purpose, rather than create a public controversy by reclaiming it. Eleanor felt a quiet satisfaction at this tacit acknowledgement of the justice she and Gabriel had sought. As Eleanor's testimony concluded, she returned to her seat beside Gabriel in the witness section. His hand briefly covered hers, a gesture of support and shared accomplishment that did not go unnoticed by those nearby. The proceedings continued into the evening, with a succession of witnesses detailing Blackwood's systematic campaign to dispossess legitimate homesteaders. Freedmen families described threats, forgery, and midnight visits from armed men. White settlers recounted similar experiences, emphasizing that Blackwood's greed had transcended racial boundaries, though his methods had often exploited existing prejudices. Maxwell Harding, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, eventually chose cooperation. His testimony provided the procedural details of how homestead certificates had been invalidated, how land records had been altered, and how the stolen gold had financed the entire operation. The colonel had vision, Harding insisted, as if this might somehow mitigate his crimes. He understood that the future belonged to those who controlled the transportation routes. Everything else was secondary. "Including the law?" Judge Harmon asked dryly. Harding had no answer for that. By midnight, the judge had heard enough to render preliminary findings. The room fell silent as he prepared to address the assembled community. "Based on the testimony presented this evening, I find sufficient evidence to support criminal charges against all surviving members of Colonel Blackwood's organization," he announced. "These charges include multiple counts of fraud, extortion, assault, and in certain cases, conspiracy to commit murder." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I am issuing an immediate stay on all land transactions involving properties identified in Michael Reed's journal or in today's testimonies. A special commission will be established to review these cases individually and restore rightful ownership where fraud can be demonstrated. This announcement prompted outright applause from the homesteaders present, many of whom had abandoned hope of recovering their stolen land. Finally, Judge Harmon concluded regarding the gold recovered by Mrs. Reed and Mr. Winters, pending consultation with federal authorities, these funds will be held in trust for their originally intended purpose, assisting freedmen and other qualified citizens in establishing viable homesteads under the 1862 Act. As the formal proceedings concluded, the mood in the town hall transformed from judicial solemnity to something approaching celebration. Homesteaders who had lost everything to Blackwood's machinations now had reason to hope. Just as so often an abstract concept on the frontier had manifested in concrete actions in official declarations. Eleanor found herself surrounded by people offering gratitude and congratulations. Freedmen, families who might now recover their land, settlers who had stood against Blackwood's intimidation, even townspeople who had secretly disapproved of the colonel's methods but feared his influence. Through it all, Gabriel remained at her side, his presence both supportive and deferential. This was in many ways Eleanor's moment, the culmination of a struggle that had begun with her simple determination to hold on to her land and honor her husband's memory. As the crowd began to disperse, William Claiborne approached them, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Reed, Mr. Winters, the governor, will be most interested in your future plans, particularly regarding the establishment of what I understand may be called Caleb's Station." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Gabriel before responding. "My immediate plan is to return to my ranch and complete the proving-up period required by the Homestead Act. Beyond that," she paused, considering her words carefully, "beyond that, I intend to honor my husband's work by ensuring the land serves those who need it most." Claiborne nodded, seemingly satisfied with this diplomatic answer. The governor anticipates significant changes in this territory as the railroad progresses. Having allies who understand the complexities of land rights will be valuable. "Is that what we are, Mr. Claiborne, the governor's allies?" Gabriel asked, his tone neutral, but his meaning clear. "Let's say individuals with aligned interests," Claiborne replied smoothly. "Progress is inevitable, Mr. Winters. The question is whether it will be guided by men like Blackwood or by those with a more inclusive vision of what that progress should mean." The subtle recruitment attempt was not lost on either of them. The political landscape of the territory was shifting, and their actions had positioned them as potential influencers in whatever came next. "We'll consider the governor's perspective," Eleanor said diplomatically, "once more immediate matters are resolved." As Claiborne departed with a courteous nod, Gabriel turned to Eleanor, a hint of amusement in his eyes despite his battered appearance. "Political allies already. Michael would be impressed." "Or horrified," Eleanor countered with a small smile, "depending on what the governor actually wants." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Judge Harmon, now looking weary after the lengthy proceedings but satisfied with the outcomes. "Mrs. Reed, arrangements have been made to escort you back to your ranch tomorrow," he informed her. "A small detachment will accompany you to retrieve the gold and provide security until more permanent measures can be established." "Thank you, Your Honor," Eleanor replied, "though I should mention that my ranch is quite capable of providing its own security, as recent events have demonstrated." The judge acknowledged this with a respectful inclination of his head. "Nevertheless, the formalities must be observed, particularly given the value of what you'll be transporting." As the judge moved on to speak with others, Eleanor and Gabriel finally made their way out of the town hall into the quiet street beyond. The night was clear, stars stretching in infinite profusion across the vast prairie sky. After the confined intensity of the proceedings, the open air felt like a benediction. "What happens now?" Gabriel asked as they walked slowly toward the hotel. "After the gold is secured, after you receive your final deed." The question encompassed far more than practical next steps, and both of them knew it. Eleanor considered her answer carefully, aware that they stood at a crossroads not just of circumstances, but of possibilities. "Now we build something," she said finally, "something worthy of what it cost to get here." Gabriel nodded, understanding the layers of meaning in her words. Together, Eleanor stopped, turning to face him directly under the silver light of the stars. The man before her was not Michael, could never be Michael, but he carried a portion of the same vision, the same commitment to a justice larger than personal gain. "Michael's letter said to trust you," she said quietly, "and despite everything, How we met, what you kept from me. I find that I do. That's not quite an answer, Gabriel observed, though, without reproach. No, Eleanor agreed, because I don't have all the answers yet, just the next steps. She gestured toward the horizon where her ranch lay waiting. Return home, secure what we've fought for, honor those we've lost by continuing their work. Gabriel's expression softened with understanding. And see what grows from there. Yes, Eleanor said simply. See what grows. As they resumed their walk toward the hotel, Eleanor felt a curious lightness, despite the gravity of all they had experienced. The land that had taken so much from her had also revealed her strength, her capacity for justice, and perhaps the possibility of a future she hadn't dared imagine in the lonely days after Michael's death. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The retrieval of the gold, the establishment of new purposes for her land, the complex process of healing wounds, both personal and communal. But for now, under the vast canopy of stars, Eleanor Reed walked beside a man who understood the value of what they had accomplished and the importance of what still remained to be done. The gold of forgotten patriots would finally serve its intended purpose. And Eleanor, once fighting merely to keep a promise to her husband, had become something more, a guardian of a legacy, a builder of what might yet be. The land might devour the weak, but it also revealed the strong. Tonight, beneath the eternal stars of the American frontier, Eleanor Reed knew beyond doubt which she truly was. 6 months later, the last rail spike was driven into place 3 miles east of Eleanor Reed's ranch. The Transcontinental Railroad had arrived, bringing with it the change that Blackwood had foreseen, but not in the manner he had planned. The water stop and supply depot now stood on land that Eleanor had sold at a fair price, not extorted, not seized, with the proceeds funding improvements to what the locals had come to call Caleb's Station. The ranch itself had transformed. The cabin remained, its walls strengthened and roof repaired, but now additional structures dotted the property: a bunkhouse for travelers, a meeting hall where freedmen, homesteaders gathered to learn about their rights under the law, and a small school where Sarah Freeman taught children of all colors to read the words that would protect their futures. On the day Eleanor received her final homestead certificate, Judge Harmon himself made the journey from the territorial capital to present it. The document, bearing the official seal that Michael had worked so hard to earn, now hung beside his military commendation, no longer a reminder of loss, but a symbol of promises kept. The Lincoln Fund had done its work, dispersed among 23 freedmen, families who now worked their own land across the territory. Not all would succeed. The land remained unforgiving, the markets unpredictable, the prejudices deep-rooted, but they had what had almost been stolen from them: the chance to try to build to belong. Gabriel had stayed as everyone expected. The bounty hunter had found something worth more than gold, a purpose that honored those lost along the way. He still rode out, sometimes following rumors of other Blackwoods, other schemes to deny Americans their rightful place on the frontier. But he always returned to the ranch, to the woman who had come to share more than just his commitment to justice. Not all wounds healed cleanly. Maxwell Harding served his sentence in the territorial prison, but many of Blackwood's financial backers escaped formal punishment, their influence too entrenched, their connections too valuable to the expanding nation. The governor's office made compromises that Eleanor found bitter, Gabriel found predictable, and Michael would have found worthy of continued vigilance. The America being built along those gleaming rails remained imperfect, its ideals sometimes betrayed by those entrusted with their protection, its promises sometimes deferred for those most deserving of their fulfillment. But in this small corner of the vast frontier, Eleanor Reed and Gabriel Winters ensured that Lincoln's vision had not died with him, that the sacrifice of men like Michael Reed and Marcus Sullivan had not been in vain. On the ridge behind the ranch, 2 simple headstones stood side by side, Michael's long established, and a newer one for Marcus, whose remains Gabriel had recovered and brought to rest beside his fallen comrade. Eleanor placed fresh wildflowers there each week, not in grief, but in gratitude for the men who had understood that true patriotism meant holding the nation to its highest ideals, even when those in power faltered. The railroad brought the future thundering across the plains, but at Caleb's Station, that future would be built on justice earned through honest labor, protected by unwavering resolve. For Eleanor Reed, once a widow struggling to hold on to a promise, and Gabriel Winters, once a man consumed by guilt and vengeance, the horizon no longer represented a boundary, but a challenge not just to survive this unforgiving land, but to transform it into the America that had been paid for with the blood of patriots, forgotten and remembered alike.